Their data centers and cloud technology are changing the way I live, learn, and reach for my dreams.
They're working hard with their partners to reimagine what the future of shopping looks like and are helping our business stay prepared for the demands of our customers.
They help me and my staff stay secure, whether working from home or from the office. Please excuse the noise, guys. School's just closed. Ensuring that all our sensitive information
does not land up in the wrong hands. They monitor forecourts to keep me moving. I heard they even monitor a fuel pipeline all the way from Mozambique. They create and manage software that helps to keep the retail supply chains going. Okay, and did you get the money I sent you?
They enable nearly 200 million transactions a month.
Their underground Wi-Fi helps to keep miners safe and in touch with those above ground. They help to bring wealth to the surface.
They take care of your technology
so that you can focus on your customers' needs.
BCX, our most important customer,
is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7th annual Directors Event, South Africa's biggest board meeting. We are hosting our meeting online for the 2nd year running. Of course, this has now become the norm all over the world, no thanks to the global COVID-19 pandemic. But you may ask, has COVID-19 given our country an opportunity to reimagine, innovate, and perhaps do things differently? At a time of great necessity, the resilience and ingenuity of South Africa has been tested. While the challenges of slow government reform, corruption, inequality, widespread unemployment, and an inadequate education system, as well as an energy crisis, add to that climate change challenges, all of these remain a priority. It is still important to reflect on the lessons we've learned since the COVID-19 virus arrived and demanded rapid change. This year, the Directors Event is focused on reimagining South Africa's future. How? By understanding that we can learn from the past 12 months in terms of working closer together between business and government, building a leading digital economy that can support our country's economic revival, and of course, the urgency of investing in affordable, high-quality technology and digital skills, as well as a better way forward for a healthcare system whose capacity has been stretched beyond expectation. Today, let us debate, let us brainstorm, and let us also recommend solutions that will steer our country forward in a COVID-19 world. For those that are social media savvy, please do follow us. Our hashtag is ST_Directors Event. Let me say thank you to our headline partner, BCX, for enabling today's discussion. Let me also thank the Institute of Directors in South Africa for your continued support. Ladies and gentlemen, please use the live chat facility to post all of your questions. Myself and my fellow facilitators will make sure we pick as many questions at least as possible throughout the day. In the next few days following the conclusion of our board meeting, you will receive a thank you mailer with a link to a feedback survey. We ask that you please click on that link, take a couple of minutes to complete the survey. Of course, I'm dangling a little carrot, 1,000 Rand take a lot voucher for any item that you might need perhaps to warm yourself up this winter. Now, To kick us off and set the scene for this year's directors event, South Africa's biggest board meeting, please welcome the editor of the Sunday Times, Mr. Stembiso Msomi.
Good morning. Welcome to the 7th year of the directors event, proudly presented by the Sunday Times and PCX. Last year, little did we expect that a virus would spread so rapidly and with such untamed virulence across the globe to turn our lives inside out. When the country was placed in a state of emergency and we entered the first lockdown phase, did we think that more than a year later we'd still be wearing masks and social distancing, or still eagerly waiting for vaccination? What we've come to learn over the past 15 months is that the only certainties we can count on are still death and taxes. Change has become our new normal. To survive, we must adapt. To thrive, well, we need to start thinking differently. We need to plot a new course for the country, a course that leaves no one behind. This is what the directors event is about, reimagining South Africa. Our economy is perched on a precipice where it can either tumble or soar. The pandemic has highlighted the fragile links between formal and informal sectors that impact the GDP and social well-being of our citizens. Whether it's maintaining food security and sustainability, supporting tourism and hospitality, greasing the wheels for smoother and international trade and foreign investment, and urgent remediation of reliable, efficient energy grid, the public sector and private sectors must actively and creatively engage. Did you know that in the past year, South Africa's social media users grew by 3 million people? Did you know that we now have more than 100 million mobile connections in the country, which equates to almost 2 mobile devices for every person? What does this tell us? It shows us how important technology has become in the lives of every South African. The pandemic has accelerated the need for technology that keeps us connected and keeps us working. Technology will be the currency of South Africa's future. We cannot ignore the fast advance of the fourth industrial revolution. We need to build a digital economy to support our economic revival. Inaction is not an option. Today, we are joined by some of the country's leading minds and voices. They'll share their insights on how to become masters of change, to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead, even when they may be difficult to spot amid an economic and healthcare crisis. From rethinking education and skills development in a fourth industrial revolution world, to how we rejuvenate and restructure our overstretched healthcare system, today we ignite the narrative at South Africa's biggest board meeting. Despite South Africa's numerous challenges, we have a great deal to be optimistic about. While our diversity brings challenges, it also fuels the innovation to see us take the lead in Africa. Leading requires the commitment and cooperation of the public and private sectors, and the directors event provides the platform for establishing common ground and fresh ideas. Thank you for joining us as we chart this new vision together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nomdai, for those opening words. And there you go, South Africans, 100 million cell phone connections, an average of 2 cell phones each. What are you guys doing with 2 cell phones? But it does, of course, make the point that connectivity has improved, connectivity has increased, and that means we can reimagine knowing we've got the power of technology to support us. Now, all of this would not be possible without the continued support of the leaders in digital transformation, PCX. Here are some opening remarks from their CEO, Mr. Jonas Bukhoshi.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 7th annual Directors Event, South Africa's biggest boardroom. As BCX, we are proud to be the sponsor again. It is not often that we get so many industry decision makers all in one place with one common purpose, and that is how to accelerate progress in our country. Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. We can't talk about the country and our people without talking about COVID-19 pandemic, its impact on lives and livelihoods. The effect of the pandemic are going to last with us for a long time, either with people who have lost their loved ones, those who lost their jobs, or in the mental health of society. A number of developed economies, those countries have they have the pandemic under control as they, amongst others, effectively roll out the vaccine program. Unfortunately, us and a number of developing countries are not out of the woodwork yet. We still have this as a challenge. It is important for us as leaders to understand this impact on our people. Like many of you, I worry. I worry about whether, as a country, we will be ready when another pandemic breaks out, because it will break out. I worry about whether we as a country will be able to provide effective healthcare when I see some of the hospitals unable to provide the basics like water. Like many of you, I worry. I worry when I see the unemployment rate in South Africa, especially of the young people, and wonder how helpless and hopeless they must feel. Like many of you, I worry when I watch the Zondo Commission proceedings, and I wonder what is the psyche of the nation and the impact on the moral fiber of society. Like most of you, these things worry me. As I worry about all these things, I remember a report that I read earlier this year. The report I'm referring to is the Edelman's Trust Barometer. In a nutshell, the report, which is a result of the survey of more than 38 countries, including South Africa, indicate that worldwide we have a leadership crisis. Across the globe, people do not trust societal leaders to do the right things. Basically, across the world, people don't trust their leaders, be they religious leaders, government leaders, NGOs, editors or journalists, even CEOs. Across the board, trust is diminishing. In the midst of all of that, business is emerging as the only area where people have trust. What the reports indicate is that people believe that amongst all of those bad leaders, including business, by the way, business is the better one. They believe that business is the only area that has competence and credibility. But that trust is not generic, it's local, it's localized. So people believe or trust in their own organization. They see their own organization, their leaders, as the mainstay of trust. This increase in trust in CEOs comes with responsibility and expectations. What the people say is that they expect that CEOs must step in where government is unable to solve societal problems. 68% of them said so. These people expect CEOs to drive change and not get the government to impose change on them. 66% of them said so. These people believe that CEOs must be accountable to society, not only to shareholders and board members. And about 65% of them say so. These expectations are nothing but a call to CEOs. This is a call that cannot be missed, a call that cannot be ignored. The answer to this call cannot be timid or half-hearted. The response has to be swift and determined. I think in South Africa, more than any other country, we need that kind of response for the sake of our children and the sake of the future of South Africa. So today, as we talk about the economy of South Africa in the context and the midst of COVID pandemic, as we talk about the unemployment, a real-time bomb for South Africa, as we talk about how to effectively and efficiently allocate health resources in the economy, remember the call from the people, the call to industry decision makers. I have no doubt that people gathered here have the intelligence and capacity to come up with solutions that will solve the challenges that are facing our country. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us be bold, let us be forthright with the kind of solutions we are proposing. On that note, thank you very much and welcome to the board meeting. Thank you.
BCX Digital Innovation Awards 2021. Are you a large corporate or an SME solving real business challenges with real solutions, delivering true innovation, true impact, true results, reimagining how customers live, learn, work? Submissions are now open. BCX Digital Innovation Awards 2021, based on your true stories. Enter online at www.bcx.co.za. Hashtag BCXDIA.
Thank you very much, Jonas, for those opening words. And indeed, in the middle of distrust, in the middle of so much anxiety about some of the social ills we face, not just as a country, but as a world, we want to make sure that our leaders indeed have the capacity and the intellect to try and come up with solutions. And that's why we've gathered today, because dialogue in these times is so, so important. We've now come to the formalities of our board meeting, ladies and gentlemen, and to deliver the 2021 Directors Event Keynote Address, please welcome the Director for Africa Corporate Network at The Economist, Mr. Herman Warren.
Thank you, Andile, and the Sunday Times and the sponsors of this event for providing a platform and this opportunity to engage, and perhaps most importantly, for giving me an opportunity to wear a tie. I've become tired of wearing T-shirts and track pants. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I trust you are well. Hope you are engaging from a warm place. And it's my great pleasure to contribute to today's proceedings. I'll begin by taking you back to the start of a period we'd very much prefer not to have begun, but nonetheless still contend with, must make sense of, and learned from. In late 2019, and even into early 2020, few anticipated the impact of the novel coronavirus. At the Economist Group, where I'm employed, we were watching events before the virus, we now know as COVID-19, even had a name. As the first 2 months of last year elapsed, coverage of the virus moved from below the cover of the weekly newspaper, The Economist, to on it. And indeed, as January elapsed, late January to early to late March, the virus featured on the cover no less than 3 times. I remember one cover indicating how bad will it get, a subsequent cover indicating it's gone global, and then in March, around about the time that we went into hard lockdown into South Africa, there was an image on the cover with a sign over it saying closed. But admittedly, in the early part of 2020, I would argue there was an underestimation of the subsequent human and economic toll in store. However, as events unfolded, that quickly changed, and the outlook shifted to a much more foreboding quadrant. The pandemic has brought to the fore the importance of proximity. Our ability to rub shoulders figuratively and literally underpins our health, our well-being, and our livelihoods. As the warning signs increased, African leaders were very proactive in their attempt, and you'll remember this phrase, to flatten the curve. Regional leaders, by and large, acted with sober-mindedness and were science-led, expert-led. Africa had the advantage of institutions, mechanisms, and experience attuned to dealing with various infectious diseases. And to be sure, demographics were also on the region's side. We are a young continent, after all. Also, leaders had the benefit of hindsight, of observing and learning from successes and shortcomings of various jurisdictions as the viral wave rushed out of Asia and washed over European and other geographic shores. Undoubtedly, regional leaders were aware that, relatively speaking, Africa's healthcare system suffered from a dearth of resources, from the number of hospital beds to personnel to PPE, ventilators, and other categories of non-pharmaceutical intervention. But African leaders' quick, decisive action undoubtedly saved lives. However, the blunt instruments of lockdowns and social distancing cannot be a constant, particularly in a region such as ours, where 86% of the workforce occupies the informal sector, bringing to the fore that point I made about proximity and its fundamental link to our livelihoods. A sustainable cure was required, and the pandemic set off a frantic race for a vaccine. And thankfully, a number of viable and safe candidates have been produced in record time. Nonetheless, the pandemic is shining a light on deficiencies and inequalities both within and across nations. In far too many instances, those paying the heaviest price are the least capacitated to shoulder the burden. Frontline workers, hourly workers, those without the option to work remotely, those without access to adequate, appropriate health care, middle-income countries, which is what South Africa is, part of a set of countries home to 3/4 of the world's population, nearly 2/3 of the poor, but just 1/3 of global GDP. These middle-income nations have been hit particularly hard. A season of sowing, a season of reaping, and we must be honest about that, of poor governance and poor decision-making over years has been reaped in the bitter fruits of a lack of adequate water and sanitation, insufficient power generation, lack of access at all or affordably to ICT infrastructure and services, high unemployment, limited fiscal space to respond with the same largesse of wealthier nations. To be sure, wealthier nations struggle as well. Cast your mind's eye to the scenes emanating from Italy, for example, last year around this time, or hospitals at or over capacity in some U.S. states just months ago. However, OECD nations, which is a relatively richer club of 30-odd nations, pulled levers that middle income and poorer nations could not. Trillions of US dollars have been added to these governments' balance sheets. Debt to GDP ratios are well above 100% in the OECD. The US, for example, over the 12-month period beginning March 2020, ending in March 2021, passed $5 trillion in aid packages, equal to around a quarter of US GDP. And another $4 trillion is on the table, recently proposed by the White House as part of President Biden's effort to build back better. These injections are raising concerns about inflation and the potential need to increase interest rates, which could scupper fragile economic recovery and unsettle the global financial system. In 2020, 6 countries defaulted on their sovereign debts. One of those countries is not far north of where I stand today, Zambia. And as a result, the Zambian economy, which contracted last year, will also do so in this year. At the Economist Intelligence Unit, our base case forecast is that the recent and sharp rise in inflation, for example, in the United States, just yesterday, hot off the press, the inflation numbers came out the highest they've been in 13 years at 5%. But we think that the sharp rise in inflation is short-term in nature, and that low interest rates, and in some instances negative interest rates, will remain a feature over the near to medium term. Nonetheless, I would urge all of you to keep a keen eye on the inflation outlook, given the potential implications. As we move through the latter part of 2020, things began to look less gloomy. The vaccine candidates that were in trials looked very viable, and the economy began to look like it was going to perform not in the growth category, but much better than had been anticipated. You all may recall that at some stage last year, there were analysts in South Africa predicting double-digit declines in the South African economy. And although the economy contracted 7%, much better than some of the worst-case scenarios of 16 or 17%. Last year, the global economy contracted 3.8%, which was better than the EIU forecast when in its worst place was around 5.3%. And in 2021, the economic outlook is brighter. World GDP will grow 5.2%. South Africa's and the wider Africa region's key trading partners are all in the proverbial economic black. The European Union, which collectively is our largest trading partner here in South Africa, will grow 4.2%. China, which is on a bilateral basis, South Africa and indeed the region's largest trading partner, will grow 8.5%. And China was the largest economy to grow of the large economies. It also grew last year, bucking the overall trend. Commodity prices are buoyant. Just reference the most recent announcement on South Africa's current account figures, or check what the rand-dollar exchange rate is for evidence. Sub-Saharan Africa, however, will have the weakest recovery among the sub-regions of the global economy. This year, Sub-Saharan Africa's GDP will grow 2.1%. weighted by the economic performances, of course, of the region's 2 largest economies, South Africa and Nigeria. Fundamentally, however, faster and sustainable economic recovery will not be assured until and unless we tackle the virus. Variants such as alpha and beta are harbingers of the risk of not stamping it out and underscore that no one is safe unless we all are. Many countries may not achieve herd COVID-19 immunity for years. For example, at the current pace of vaccinations, Indonesia, Southeast Asian country, will only achieve the level of mass vaccination in 2025. Some countries may never achieve herd immunity via vaccinations. A significant number of countries falling into the delayed and potentially never categories are unfortunately in our region, in Africa. Somewhat encouragingly, efforts and indications from the US, the EU, Russia, China, among others, suggest there's a recognition of security only being assured in the collective sense. We'll only be safe when everyone is safe. So expect to see increased application of vaccine diplomacy. It goes without saying that a pandemic was not something unknown as a risk. A study of history shows that pandemics have been a feature of human history for millennia. Disappointingly, this one clearly was not handled well, coming at the cost of millions of lives, multiple times more livelihoods lost or negatively impacted. And although there will be economic growth this year, it will come off a lower base. South Africa's GDP, for example, is unlikely to return to its full 2019 economic output level until early 2024. We'll experience 4 lost years. As part of my work as Africa Director for the Economist Corporate Network, I regularly engage with executive and non-executive leaders, I'm sure like many of you who are tuning in live today, helping them to raise their gaze, ask better questions, and make more informed and effective decisions. In many of my interactions, particularly over the last year, a resounding message comes through. The pandemic didn't change firm strategy. It confirmed its appropriateness. It accelerated the need for its implementation, as well as trends underway. In short, the pandemic exposed weaknesses and strengths along a number of key dimensions and provided answers to pertinent questions. For example, was digitalization appropriately managed in the organization? How well prepared was the organization and leadership team for an inevitable shift to digital stakeholder engagement? Were investments in people development up to scratch to better secure success in the present and future, the here and now and the horizon? No one has a crystal ball. As leaders, we deal with uncertainty, complexity, volatility. We consult stakeholders and experts, we distill risks and opportunities, we develop scenarios, we apply probabilities where appropriate, and make calls with varying degrees of confidence and conviction. Les Brown said, "If you do what's easy, your life will be hard. If you do what's hard, your life will be easy." The pandemic has reinforced the importance of doing the basics right, as well as addressing the hard things consistently. In a couple of years, we'll mark the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his celebrated "I Have a Dream" speech. Nearly 6 decades later, the weighty words Dr. King eloquently strung together on that balmy summer day still resonate. The aspect from that address I call your attention is where he cited the fierce urgency of now. He indicated this is no time, and I quote, to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, unquote. I ask you to reflect within your domains of influence and responsibility on the question, what is fierce and urgent or likely to be? What is the writing on your wall, or in these times on your screen, indicating? What should you be doing in the spaces you occupy and are charged with improving to address the most important issues at hand or with the potential to materialize? Acting in the present, my message today, let's never take ourselves too seriously. Humility is a virtue, but let's take what we do seriously. Let's hold ourselves to a higher standard and expect in a constructive fashion no less from others, suppliers, staff, politicians, and so on. It will take some time to recover the economic ground lost, particularly in middle-income countries like South Africa, 2024 perhaps, to return to 2019 GDP levels. Nonetheless, globally, the lights of recovery are doing more consistent shining than flickering, notwithstanding what your own lights may be suggesting with our bouts of load shedding. There will be, undoubtedly, unforeseen circumstances and curveballs thrown our way. What matters most is not just what we do during a crisis, but what we do before it. I would argue the pre-crisis actions probably matter more. Let that be a key lesson we take from this pandemic and this time and space we have the privilege of occupying. May today's engagements leave you better informed and empowered to make a positive difference in your organization and among all your stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herman. Wow, what an interesting overview of what we've gone through in the past 12 months. The 4 last years. It's going to take us 4 years to get back to 2019 levels when it comes to economic activity. That is sobering. And indeed, may today's discussions help us begin that journey of recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, Herman can be contacted at herman.warren@economist.com or on his Twitter handle @HermanWarren. Thank you very much, Herman, once again. Next up is our chairman's report. Now, as indicated earlier, one of the key lessons we've learned in the past year is that we need a capable and functional state for us to be able to even reimagine the future of our nation. Our chairman this year is a lady who leads an institution that is critical in holding to account all people entrusted with the management of public funds and resources. So, to table this year's report, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Auditor General of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke.
Ready to go? Okay. Good morning, good morning. If your thoughts are as tall as the height of your ceiling, you cannot fly above your room. And what separates a weak dreamer and a great dreamer is that the weak dreamer is wishing and waiting, while the great dreamer is willing and working. These are the wise words of Israel Aivo, a 31-year-old Ghanaian author and speaker. And they resonate very well as they serve to motivate us to challenge ourselves to work harder and contribute meaningfully to the democratic project in our country. Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Andile Khumalo, Mr. Tembi Somsomi, the editor of the Sunday Times, Mr. Jonas Bukhoshi, the CEO of BCX, the organizers and hosts of the Directors event since 2015, my fellow speakers and panel members, captains of industry and leaders that are joining this 7th edition of South Africa's biggest boardroom meeting. What will it take to strengthen our country's democracy and build confidence by enabling oversight? Democracy, as a word, originates from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Democracy, therefore, ought to empower people, all people, or at least the majority of people. Confidence comes from the Latin word confidere, meaning have full trust. In addressing today's topic, strengthening democracy and public confidence by enabling oversight, my perspective is that of the Auditor General of South Africa, the Chapter 9 institution for which I work. However, being at this august assembly of public and private sector leaders, I will touch on what every leader in these sectors across our broader society could indeed contribute. In our daily professional lives collectively, we are offered opportunities to make a lasting, impactful difference to the lives of South Africans. Since we are at South Africa's biggest board meeting, let us recall the key purpose of any board. The Institute of Directors sums it up as to ensure the company's prosperity by collectively directing the company's affairs while meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and of relevant stakeholders. At the AGSA, the Auditor General of South Africa, we are mandated by the Constitution of the Republic to enable oversight and public accountability through our work. In our line of work, we produce audit reports and present them to our auditees, to Parliament, and to legislatures, as well as the local councils. And we do so that we enable them to oversight their own administrations, as well as the political leadership, and make sure that they hold them to account. Our audit reports cover a number of areas. First area is on the credibility of financial information. The second area is on the usefulness and reliability of performance information. And the third area relates to compliance with key laws and regulations that relate to financial and performance management. So often when we talk about clean audits, it relates to an auditee that has demonstrated credibility of financial statements and published those, and has published a useful and reliable performance report, and doesn't have significant findings related to compliance with laws and regulations. And we complete these audits and related reports year on year without fail. However, after many years of us repeating the same message, one about there being no meaningful improvements on audit outcomes, no sustainable solutions to improving controls and disciplines over financial management, we continued to report about growing irregular expenditure, and we continued to lament about the lack of consequence management. After many years of us saying the same thing, change was inevitable. In 2019, in the month of April, the President of the Republic signed into law amendments to the Public Audit Act, which enabled the Auditor General to not only report on audit outcomes, but also to enforce accountability. We're required to exercise our powers where accounting officers fail to enforce accountability, because they're required to do so in terms of the PFMA. So we step in when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And by accounting officers, we mean those that head up the administration of public institutions. That would be the directors general, the heads of department, the municipal managers. And in the context of public entities, such as state-owned entities, the law refers to accounting authorities, which essentially are the boards. So we are directing our effort and our reports and our action towards the people that are entrusted with managing public funds. And as I say, we act only if they do not. So the amendments are really intended as a complementary mechanism in the broader public sector accountability value chain. The enhanced powers, which we have implemented now for just over 2 years, require us to identify material irregularities and ensure that these are acted upon by accounting officers and accounting authorities. The material irregularity is very similar to a reportable irregularity in the private sense. So an MI, by definition, refers to any non-compliance, any contravention of legislation, any fraud, theft, or even any breach of fiduciary duty, which we identified through our audit. And where that sort of non-compliance has the impact, or is likely to have the impact of financial loss, of misuse or loss of a public resource, or causing substantial harm to a public sector institution or to the general public. In enforcing accountability, we're required to refer the identified material irregularity to a public body with a mandate for investigations or for law enforcement. So here we will be referring matters to the SIU, to the Hawks, to the police, or to the NPA. And we're required to then include specific recommendations in our audit report on what should be done to address the matter. If our recommendations are then implemented, we don't have to step in any further. It is only if there's failure to implement our recommendations that the matter escalates. And at this point, we would then be able to take binding remedial action. And if the accounting officer or accounting authority still fails to implement that binding remedial action, then we can issue what is called a certificate of debt in the name of the accounting officer or even members of the board that had failed to implement their powers and execute on their given responsibilities. So it's really about making sure that we do enforce accountability. I've mapped out a process which does sound long, and it does because it takes time. And that's because we've designed it to ensure that we exercise our powers in accordance with the principles of fair administrative justice. Whilst the process does not lead us to sending people to jail, as some may have suggested, it can get us to effect visible consequences for wrongdoing. Importantly, these powers create an opportunity for us to contribute to improving the responsiveness of those appointed as stewards of public funds. And we do so that they may prioritize the changes that are necessary to improve performance, accountability, and integrity of public institutions. Over the last cycle of the provincial and national government audits, we identified 75 material irregularities valued at a financial loss of 6.9 billion rand on aggregate. And these are under our watchful eye for implementation. So we will continue to watch whether the accounting officers and accounting authorities do that which they're supposed to do, which would be fixing the internal controls that failed, reporting matters for law enforcement where that becomes a feature, recovering funds that are lost, and taking disciplinary action against officials that either underperformed or transgressed the law. And where the actions are deemed to be appropriate and adequate, then we need not act any further. It is only when we do not believe that there's adequate action being taken that we will indeed escalate the matter and exercise our powers further. So I'm sharing with you what the supreme audit institution of our country is doing to step up and to make sure that we do support democracy. My over 3,500 colleagues and I will continue to find every opportunity to improve what we do and how we do it, so that we progressively realize our ambition of strengthening democracy and delivering value and benefits to society. We appreciate that the impact of our work will be felt if other parts of South Africa Inc. also work. The project of building the South Africa that we all dream of, one that we all deserve, requires that all of us work collectively towards it. And the collective that I refer to covers all of us that hold positions of responsibilities in any part of SA Inc. Whether we are in the public or private sector, all of us that are entrusted with leading roles within institutions, in whatever capacity, whether it is in the executive or the non-executive sphere, we share a duty to act as stewards over the capital that is allocated to us, deploy it such that it delivers value and benefit to shareholders and relevant stakeholders, and ensure that we account transparently for our decisions and actions, and thereby enhance public trust and confidence in the institutions that we lead. South Africa Inc., as it is today, continues to battle with alarming inequality, grinding poverty, and growing unemployment. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought into very sharp focus the impact of these challenges, these same challenges, especially in the light of weak capabilities within government. Our experiences, our shared experiences over the last 14 months have highlighted the urgency with which we must work collectively and cohesively to design and implement the solutions that are both effective and sustainable. At a minimum, we have to ensure that each of us who are entrusted with leadership responsibilities in an institution is concerned with meeting his or her obligations to society in its breadth and complexity. Each of us that serves as a member of a board of directors is charged with the duty to exercise effective oversight so as to, and I'll quote again, ensure that the company or the organization or indeed the country's prosperity is achieved, and to direct the affairs of our institutions while meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and broader relevant stakeholders. That's how we're going to inspire confidence, strengthen democracy, and deliver lasting value and benefits to citizens. Master of ceremonies, our failure to run our institutions such that we do inspire public confidence is a bigger threat to our democracy than we realize. Such failures manifest directly in the work that we do as auditors of state institutions. When we conduct our audits in each institution, we look at whether in the course of acquiring goods and services, that government department or public entity or municipality has complied with key laws and regulations relating to procurement and contract management. These prescripts are designed to ensure that the public institutions comply with the provisions of Section 217 of the Constitution of the Republic, which states that public procurement must be undertaken in a manner that is fair, transparent, provides equitable access to opportunities to deal with government, is competitive and cost-effective. And we find through all of our audits that the vast majority of our auditees have audit findings in this very area of procurement and contract management, and we report on this every year. It is these non-compliance findings that mostly result in the irregular expenditure number that we report on every year. And yes, the primary responsibility to ensure that these noble constitutional principles are met rests with the people entrusted with running government. The reality is that on the other side of each transaction is a private sector institution. Over several months now, we've listened to the evidence led at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. These testimonies, read together with the work of investigative journalists, as well as the reports from the public investigative bodies, as well as with our own reports. If one considers a combination of these reports, it's quite clear that there are some worrying tendencies around how public sector institutions benefit improperly from the existing weaknesses in the state. This raises some key questions for boards of private sector institutions on whether, in their oversight role, they are effective in ensuring that the institutions are indeed meeting the appropriate interests of shareholders and relevant stakeholders. Now, earlier I promised to demonstrate how in our daily professional lives we can make a lasting impact on the lives of South Africans. And I'm not talking about acts of charity, which are important. I am talking about making sure that the decisions we make when we sit at the boardroom table are about giving people better education, better quality healthcare, and other such enablers like fast and affordable internet access so that they can raise their personal incomes, which ultimately also is good for business. Knowing what we know about the inequalities of our country, we all must ask ourselves a few questions and act accordingly. Question would be, are we all in? Knowing the statistics about racial, gender, and other pressing inequalities, Are we actively combating the injustices in the companies that we run or in the organizations that we oversee? How about the suppliers of our businesses? Do we ask them to prove that they're doing enough to foster socio-economic justice? Or are we happy to simply compile reports about our narrow compliance, whether it's in the area of skills development, employment equity, enterprise and supply development, procurement management? All of those areas provide opportunities for us to think differently and act differently. Are we owning the problems of our country by doing what we can and influencing those around us to do the same? Do we hold one another account insofar as our social contract rests with the rest of society? Our economy used to be heavily dependent on mining and other extractive industries. And in many ways, we're still an economy that continues to export commodities to other countries to manufacture value-added goods that they then sell back to us. Many amongst us here sit on boards or run companies that are either part of this extractive economy or operate alongside it. Others are responsible for regulating the operations of the same industry. So the question is, when we make different decisions, are we using our influence? Are we making the type of decisions that would get us to add more value locally, create more jobs that pay better, improve the content of our higher education so that we increase the employability of graduates, and therefore help communities that are affected by the extractive industries so that they derive more economic benefit from their resources? And these are things we should be worried about in the course of executing our duties on oversight, such that we are more about adding value rather than routine compliance, or worse still, simply around extraction. Are we doing enough to stop the flow of illicit capital flows? Global Financial Integrity estimates that illicit financial flows deprive African countries of at least $50 billion annually. And they've possibly deprived them of up to $1 trillion over the 50 years up to 2016. Are we actively ensuring that we eliminate practices of overpricing or underpricing of trade deals, inappropriate transfer pricing, using tax havens so that we erode the tax revenue base that's available to some governments? Are we ensuring that our institutions are either by commission or in omission not involved in reducing the value that's available for governments that are supposed to then use that revenue to deliver public services? So these are the questions we ought to ask ourselves in the course of executing our duties on oversight. Are we confident that the people we lead are indeed assimilating the right mentality and culture to become the agents of change for a better society? Or are we happy to let short-term financial gains override our ethical obligation to create an inclusive economy for the benefit of future generations? Master of Ceremonies, my questions do echo those that have been raised by most of the speakers that have delivered the chairman's report at this very event over the past 6 years. For example, in her chairman's report in 2020, the chairman of ABSA Group, Ms. Wendy Lucas-Bull, she talked about the need to address the downward spiral through drastic changes in the composition and efficacy of government spend. She highlighted the need for a clear response that all stakeholders can support and called for a relentless focus on the implementation of an agreed social compact and called upon government, organized business, labor, and civil society to collaborate in this regard. She was calling upon us here to take the lead, to collectively enable effective oversight. In 2019, Ms. Phuthi Mahanyele-Dabengwa, who was then the executive chairperson of Sigma Capital, she stressed the importance of education in addressing the socio-economic problem of what has been termed the ninja generation, that of young people with no income, no jobs, and no assets. education that is situated in the needs of the labor market, that makes sure that young people are employable, and also makes sure that entrepreneurship is an option for them. That's what she was calling for. And she cautioned that without oversight and governance in procurement, the enterprises that these young people then venture into would not manage to break into the industries of their choice. Each chairman's report to date has tackled pertinent issues and how, as leaders, we can help strengthen democracy by prioritizing the broader society in the performance of our board duties. Nicholas Kruger's speech at the inaugural directors event emphasized how South Africa could grow faster and become more equitable only if it mobilized all of its resources with visionary and value-based leadership, with policy certainty, a positive attitude, and greater collaboration. Kruger's point about how, as leaders, we are accountable to our broader society, not only to the narrow, short-term financial interests. That message was aligned with the sentiments of Dr. Roel Khoza, the former chairman and non-executive director of Nedbank. Dr. Khoza spoke of the boards not operating in a vacuum, but rather in the context of their environment, so that they become vision-led, purpose-driven harbingers of the future. Because destiny, he said, is not a matter of chance, but of choice. So in delivering this chairman's report, I've tried to appeal to the collective conscience of everyone in this esteemed audience to rekindle our responsibility to society. I've also highlighted the scale of inequality, which can only be closed by institutions led by leaders who are conscious and conscientious and who are committed to reimagining their role. This does not mean veering from our primary mandate and that of the organizations we serve, not at all. It rather signifies that being diligent and staying true to our ethical obligations, and more importantly, by reimagining our role at a pace that is faster than the rate of changes in the environment. A failure to keep up with the pace of change will make it difficult for us to deal with future external shocks like we've experienced now around COVID-19. And here we bring to mind others such as Ebola, the natural disasters, and even the global credit crunch of 2008. As my fellow speaker said earlier on, there will be future disasters. There will be future emergencies. The question is, how do we prepare ourselves so that we can respond even better? A careful assessment of public sentiment in the past few weeks and months show how impatient people are because oversight was sacrificed, a sentiment that we're also experiencing through the work we do at the AGSA. The impatience gets expressed in the form of service delivery protests at times, which themselves are becoming more clinically targeted. For example, someone claiming to represent Soweto Parliament circulated a video on social media just this past week. He called on people from Soweto to rise up against one state-owned enterprise by staging a sit-in at its headquarters in Sunninghill. I guess you can imagine which one it is. And he was wanting people to do this instead of burning and damaging property in Soweto where they live. Other people expressed their impatience in outright criminal activities. The rising tide of crime is in part a symbol of too many young people who have lost faith in the establishment. Failed oversight in the establishment to them justifies rebelling against the state. So I'm going to end off by highlighting the importance of us operating not with a narrow focus, but embracing our broader duties to society. We can and should better to turn the fortunes of humankind around by dreaming of flying way above our roof and by being dreamers who are willing and doing and not wishing and waiting. And I can assure you of similar commitment that we've made as an institution that I lead. And we will not abandon our own responsibility. I thank you for your kind attention, and for allowing me to participate in this session from a distance, as you have done. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tsakani, for that address. And thank you so much also for taking the opportunity to update us on the progress of how the Auditor General's office is playing a role in strengthening democracy. I particularly enjoy all the work that is happening around referring matters to law enforcement authorities. For those who are not accountable enough to implement the recommendations. We are tired of hearing over and over, year in, year out, of how the AG is recommending actions, and people are continuing to do the same thing year in, year out. So it's good to know and hear that there's real movement there. And also, one must appeal, I guess, to the security services of our country to make sure that the Office of the General is able to do this work without any fear of any intimidation from any party whatsoever. So we can get rid of all of this corrupt elements that are not robbing just the state, which is essentially taking away from the people that deserve the services they should be receiving. And also the point you made about the fact that, for every corrupter, there's a corruptee. And oftentimes on the other side of these non-compliance with procurement regulations, there's the private sector. And we must make sure that we too don't aid this corruption by working with these forces and in essence supporting what is happening so often in our public sector as well. Thank you so much, Tsakani. Much appreciated. Now, ladies and gents, we're going to take a 5-minute comfort break. So don't log off. Feel free to grab another cup of tea or coffee, warm yourself up, and prepare yourselves for the first panel discussion we're going to be having for our board meeting today. It's going to be under the title, How Do We Drive a Healthy Economy During a Pandemic? We already heard earlier on in the keynote address that we are 4 years behind. We got to catch up, and it's going to take us a while. The question is, how do we do that? And this will be chaired by award-winning broadcaster, Mr. Bruce Whitfield. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
everybody, and welcome to this session, Reimagining South Africa's Future. 24 hours is a long time in South Africa, isn't it? 24 hours ago, we had stage 3 load shedding. We still do, but we had no prospect of any relief. SAA was a basket case, and in the last 24 hours, we've had the president announce that we're going to get 100 megawatts of energy to be generated by companies, if that's what they would like to do, into the future. And we've learned over the last 24 hours that we could get as much as 5 gigawatts in the next 18 months of renewables. There is a huge opportunity there, for example. And in the last couple of minutes, the Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan, has announced that SAA will go into private control. A consortium made up of the owners of Lanseria Airport and the founders of Comair, effectively. If you go back to 1946, Gideon Novick, who at one time was a co-chief executive of BA and recently launched his own independent airline of Lyft, is part of a consortium to take 51% control of SAA. Politically, it's a minefield. Practically, it's an awesome development. And I was worried about one of my panelists today because I thought he would be the only person who was going to be glum and miserable and concerned about the future. But even Chifiwa Chivangwa from the Tourism Business Council has to have a bit of a spring in his step today. Wandile Sehlobo, the agricultural economist, has always got a spring in his step because, of course, agricultural exports have been booming over the last 18 months to 2 years or so. We've seen huge export opportunities for South Africa's wine industry and citrus in particular, but many of our other agricultural commodities. Somebody who's got an enormous spring in his step today because he is in the energy sector, Zwelaki Gila. You'll be meeting Zwelaki in just a moment, and Professor Mills Soko from the Wits Business School. Those are your panelists today as we look toward a future. When we had a booking call about 2 weeks ago to discuss the structure of what we were going to talk about today, everybody was like, no, we really need to be optimistic. Well, we don't need to make an effort anymore because a lot of good stuff is suddenly coming together. More on that in a moment. So is it possible to drive, look at my panel, aren't they lovely? Yes, we've got lights on and everything and fabulous carpets on the floors. You've seen those now. Zoom in, please. How do we drive a healthy economy in a pandemic? Is it even possible? I mean, Chifiwa, you guys have really, I think, had the worst of it in terms of the tourism sector. You got shut down in March last year, and there have been some very noble attempts of operators to start up, but without foreign tourists, you go to restaurants, you go to hotels, the places are practically ghost towns. Are you getting a sense of optimism? I mean, SAA's announcement today is a huge step in the right direction. What's your sense?
Well, Bruce, there is a sense of optimism. The fact that we got this announcement today from the Minister of Public Enterprise goes a long way in terms of restoring that confidence on SAA and also, noticing that SAA is quite important to the tourism industry here in South Africa in terms of the airlift, both internationally and both domestically. So it is important that we now have a situation where we will be moving forward. However, there's still a lot of legacy issues that we still need to deal with in terms of unflown revenue that SAA has that still need to refund back to the trade and to the consumers. We still need to deal with that. But as a sector, we are still on a low in terms of the numbers. Yes, we do have domestic travel happening, but it's mostly domestic leisure travel. We don't have conferences happening. We don't have international coming in because of many countries saying that South Africa is a no-go zone. So we still have a long way to go. And we see this by looking at the numbers from last year. If you look at the Tsakani in terms of the occupancy rate, it's quite low. And it's not sustainable for a group. So you can imagine that if you look at the guest houses, the independently owned hotels, the car rentals, the events venues, we still are very, very low. So we still need to do a whole lot more things to get to a point where we could be a little bit more sustainable across the value chain.
But for the first time in a very long time, there's actually a workable positive step in terms of giving tourism a fighting chance, which I think is important. Wadile, you never, I think, glum. 4 or 5 years ago, agriculture was dead. Land reform was going to crush commercial agriculture. Big farmers were panicking about land tenure. 5 years later, record tractor sales, record fertilizer sales, massive exports of agricultural commodities. If anything, the agricultural sector is stronger today than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a blessing for us throughout the pandemic. Obviously, the favorable weather conditions played on our side, and also the investments that the farmers had already made in the sector played on our side. So last year, everybody saw the numbers. And even as you look into 2021, I know some people are shocked by the quarterly numbers of last week to say, agriculture contracting. But we're looking at another growth of around about 5% or so this year. So we are at a good space in our side. But obviously, Bruce, we still have some challenges in there because while the sector have expanded over time, in as far as inclusion, it's one of the areas that we're still looking at within the agriculture.
And that is a critical issue for the sustainability, the long-term sustainability of the agricultural sectors. How does the sector transform in terms of ownership, in terms of access, and in terms of, I mean, as we see agriculture becoming increasingly commercialized. Now, 50 years ago, farms were 400 hectares. Now farmers are farming 20 to 50,000 hectares on a scale that was unimaginable. A lot of that's due to automation, which again makes it that much more difficult to get that inclusion coming through.
Yeah, but I think now, Bruce, what is more positive is the fact that there is some social compacting that is happening. If you think of the master plans, I know that people are tired of hearing some of those things, but the agriculture one are much more positive on it because I see it from a government space standpoint, but I also see it on what the business is putting on the table. But followed with that, we also have the blended finance instruments that are being put on the table. All of those are some of the ingredients which will accelerate the inclusion as well as the growth in agriculture. But obviously that, Bruce, is an important thing. It needs to be anchored again to a much more deliberate release of land with land rights to new black beneficiaries, which will be coming in the sector.
It's a non-negotiable. And there's also, one gets a sense from the outside that there isn't an awful sort of sense of a timeline. There isn't a terrible rush to do this thing. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think the South African government needs to really accelerate it. We see now more of a discussion in Parliament targeting the issues of Section 25 and all of those things. But I think we need to look back to say, on the government balance sheet, how much land is there? Can it be able to be released efficiently to the right beneficiary with land rights? I think that's where our energy should actually be on to anchor this growth story that we are all hoping for.
With land rights, and again, the pushback against the FF proposal of the state being the custodian of the land and running leaseholds and turning South Africa into a big leaseholder state, which again removes so much incentive from agriculture, removes so much desire to grow and improve and preserve the integrity of the land. I mean, that is absolutely critical in agriculture.
Yeah, I think symbolically they might argue for that, but if we are being realistic to say, look at South Africa today, what do we need to actually see job creation, to actually see economic opportunities? That's not the road we want to travel on.
Got you. Somebody who must have a huge spring in these steps, we're lucky Gila, who you couch yourself as an energy specialist. And I mean, just here we've got this enormous opportunity in South Africa, literally a flick of the switch. After 2 weeks of desperate load shedding, I spoke to the chief executive of Eskom last night, Andre de Ruyter, and he's a very driven individual, but even he's beginning to sound a bit tired as we really struggle in the face of a collapsing national grid. And into that steps Cyril Ramaphosa, overruling Gwede Mantashe on his 10 megawatts limit, overruling big business's 50 megawatt limit and saying, no, let's go for 100. Let's go big, let's go large, and let's get this thing done quickly. Can we get it done quickly? Do you see huge opportunity in it?
The reality is that we can get it done quickly. By most accounts, within 18 months, the megawattage that we need, that Eskom cannot produce, can actually be created from IPPs and from various other renewable energy plans, a total of 18 months. That is shorter than it would take even to get the regulatory side of a new coal power plant to even come on board. So on our end, what we're most excited about is the fact that by increasing what individual power producers can produce without getting a license, what that means is that it's putting the power back into the hands of the consumers, and that is quite exciting, especially because we know that there's many various plans of bringing some energy on board. We spoke outside about the 5 gigawatt plans that are available too. So there's a wide range of opportunity, and it is quite exciting. Unfortunately, we've had to hit the bottom for us to be able to get to this place. But when we do look at the rapid moves that the president has made, we have to be quite impressed by that.
We have a number of national sports. We have the shooting ourselves in the foot national sport, which if we took to the Olympics, we would win lots of medals. Taking a country to the brink and looking over the edge into the abyss is another national sport, which if we took to the Olympics, we would win medals. Yeah. We're getting pretty good at that sort of stuff. Fortunately, though, and somehow, I don't know how we do it, we keep sort of managing to do the U-turn at the very edge of the precipice. And I think energy's come to the precipice, hasn't it?
It has. It really has come to the precipice. And as an economist, it's important to play with numbers. I like to point things out with numbers. So
surrounded by these people, they can't.
So if we look at it from a numerical standpoint, it's costing us 500 million rand a day per stage. Now that's about 20 million rand an hour that we're costing on Eskom alone, given the state that we're in right now. And then we look at the number of megawatts that has been taken off due to maintenance, and then we look at what the stage 4 load shedding, essentially almost half of our total production capabilities have been halved. So we are now at the precipice, and so dramatic movements of even increasing what IPPs need for production without a license is a great first step in being able to motivate what we call prosumers, which are the producers and the consumers, to start generating their own power and remove that reliability from the grid.
It's a fabulous perspective. Professor Mills Soko from Wits Business School, every now and again you hear somebody say something and you go, ooh, that hurts. Oh, that's close to the edge. But I heard somebody in a bank, who shall remain nameless, the other day, talk about COVID-19 as being a necessary disruption. And fully acknowledging the pain and the dislocation and the trauma of what we've gone through in the last 15 months and will continue to go through for some time to come till we get enough vaccination. But I don't know that we would be where we are today in terms of this radical transformation of the economy. It's different to radical economic transformation, but it's radical transformation of the economy in terms of government's acceptance of public-private partnerships if we hadn't had this deeply painful process of COVID-19. I wonder if you would agree.
Yes, I agree, Bruce. I think that what COVID-19 has done has been to accelerate, force us to embrace change faster than we would have done in the past. And for me, what is important is the lessons that we learn from this. And we need to use these lessons, to drive change and to ignite a new way of doing things. And I'll identify a few lessons. One, the importance of leadership. It's very clear for me, this is the foremost lesson we've learned from this. The importance of leadership in dealing with a crisis. We have seen how countries such as New Zealand, countries such as China have provided purposeful and bold leadership, and they've been able to address this crisis. And on the other hand, we have seen countries that have been found wanting, such as the United States, during the Trump era, and in countries like Britain, as well as Brazil. So leadership is very, very important here.
And India, for example, as well. But isn't it amazing what difference leadership makes? And you just take the transition from Trump to Biden and how the global tone has changed with the change of administration. That's hugely powerful.
Within a period of months, it took over at the beginning of the year, and I look at what is achieved in terms of rolling out the vaccination program, in terms of changing America's foreign policy is now being toasted in England as we speak, where the G7 is meeting. He's done extremely well. And to me, this is very, very important. It underscores the importance of leadership. We saw also this in 2008, 2009 with Obama, how he dealt with the crisis, the global financial crisis. We saw it in 1929 with the global depression, how Roosevelt took over from Hoover. Hoover was bumbling and he took over and really provided the kind of leadership that Americans still talk about today, as the exemplar of of great leadership.
It's so ironic, and I mean, I don't want to digress too much into this, but how Republicans are perceived as to be the party of business and capitalism, and how Democrats come around and rescue capitalism time and time again, and reform capitalism to the good. They add regulation, they add taxes, they do these sorts of things, but the point is they make it sustainable.
Yeah.
And that's important.
That's important. And I think that what Biden has recognized, that things cannot continue as they did in the past. We cannot be wedded to, to certain nostrums that ideology. We need to be pragmatic about how we deal with problems. And he's recognized that some of the old tools of policy making, are no longer workable. Yeah. We need to find a new way of doing things. And this is what COVID has forced the American government to do. And I see now, for instance, there's a discussion about corporate tax and, putting a cap across the board, across the world, and that is what is being discussed. It's something that was unthinkable a few months ago.
It's revolutionary.
It's revolutionary.
And again, something that the Republicans would never have tolerated, because you can't do that, you don't tax.
Yes.
But why the hell should Apple not be paying taxes, and Microsoft not be paying taxes, and all of these multinational corporations not be paying fair taxes, when the rest of us are expected to do so? There's huge progress. I'm going to say it, because I don't think you're all too polite to say it, but imagine had this crisis happened, not only in the era of the Nokia 3310, which was a lovely phone. Fortunately, you wouldn't know it, and nor would you. It was very good. Battery lasted a week. It was great. But had this crisis happened in the Jacob Zuma era, just for a moment, the importance of leadership. I won't ask you to comment. I can see you saying, don't make me comment. But that's fine. And this is, I think, it talks to where you are as well, Lucky, in terms of a generation of people looking for solutions to problems. And there are so many South African startups. There are so many people doing incredible things. Whether you look at the guys at Yoko, or you look at so many other South African startups, the Sweep South story is so many. We've got small isolated examples. The revolution that has to happen now is the startup revolution of the problem-solving businesses of the future.
Indeed, it is. And again, to rely on statistics and economics again, if we look at the number of investments that have gone into startups in Africa this year, for the first time they have exceeded past energy investments, which has always been at the helm of what captures most of African investments, right? So when we talk about this new age revolution that's happening and where it's going to the value of startups, we're starting to see billion-dollar startups in Africa, the likes of Jumia and the likes of various other payment gateways and things that are strategically planned so that transaction and commerce across the continent becomes easier. So when the excitement that we have when we look at where things are going, we're looking at a more connected Africa, an Africa where commerce can be done a lot seamlessly. We're looking at technology that underlines for a lot more transparent, accountable transactions, things of that sort.
You're about to mention blockchain, aren't you? Because you're part of a generation that just goes, blockchain is like water to a person dying in the desert. Blockchain solves everything.
Guilty as charged, please. Guilty as charged. And we have to rely on blockchain, and where that blockchain applicability actually even moves now into the energy sector. For, let's say, your prosumers, individual power producers can now be able to transact, or will have the ability better to transact for switching off of different grids. But let's say now I can get power off of you, I can get power off of you by this technology. So I hate to preach the blockchain gospel. However, it does open up a lot of space for individual power producers in the energy space to transact, and even more so for capitalism in general.
Did they explain blockchain? No, I don't know if any normal human being can, but apparently it's magic. Apparently, it's like Aladdin's magic carpet. It'll take us to new heights. It'll take us to places we never imagined possible. That's all well and good in the future, Chifiwa. That's all well and good. Right now, we have deep crises of people's real lives. There was a Zapiro cartoon, I think from the year 2000, or maybe slightly later than that, of a woman washing clothes in a muddy puddle with a baby on her back. And there's a little boy sitting on the stoop of her shack and reading a newspaper saying, the good news is the economic fundamentals are in place. And we can talk up the opportunity, we can talk up blockchain, we can talk up electricity and SAA, and that's wonderful. But the lived experience of so many people in South Africa doesn't reflect this level of optimism. 75% of young people between the ages of 15 to 24 can't find a job. Overall unemployment rate over 42% and rising, simply because it was going that way anyway, but COVID has caused huge dislocation, particularly in your industry. A lot of pressure on your industry, once it's reignited, to actually help solve that problem. How many jobs could come out of the tourism industry in the state that it's in now, 12 months from now, assuming a resumption of global travel, assuming vaccinations, assuming a control of COVID and its variants?
Look, Bruce, we're hoping that if we are able to go back to pre-pandemic levels, pretty much the 2019 numbers of the tourist arrivals, which will be very good, we will then have the people that are now sitting at home going back to work. What we have now is that a lot of people have gone back to work, but they are working only on weekends. Some of them are working shifts, and some of them are, being remunerated half of what they used to get paid. So the situation is dire at the moment. But if we go back to those numbers, we should be able to get the people back to work. But that's not enough. When we look at the numbers, this was in 2018. We did the modeling to look at how much tourism can contribute to the economy and also to the employment. We look at various countries that we can, draw more tourists, like China, like India, like other countries in Eastern Europe that still require visas, and many other places like UK and US, which are our regular markets, but we're doing less than 1% of the total outbound market. If we can bring in those figures in, we should be able to create an additional 2 million jobs, probably by 2030. And the way we calculated that is that the more we have tourists, 12 tourists create 1 job. But if we have the frequency, at a higher level, we should be able to lessen that number to possibly 8 tourists, creating 1 job. And therefore, we can get a lot of young people in rural area, in urban areas, to get back, to work or to get employment. But that's going to require some policy changes. We need, the whole of government approach to deal with tourism, because we are dependent on Department of Transport, we are dependent on environment.
How much work is happening? Else. I mean, I don't want to turn into a whinging ninny here, but the health minister the tourism minister just became the health minister, and it's one gets the feeling that the president looked around the table and said, "Who's not busy? You're doing nothing at the moment because there's no tourism. You take that job," and hopefully it doesn't last particularly long, because your minister doesn't have the deep knowledge of health to do it, and she'll be required back in tourism pretty soon too, we hope. How seriously is tourism being treated as an opportunity?
Well, look, I will say that over the past 2 years, we've done a lot of work to ensure that government recognizes tourism as an important part of the economy. It was a difficult work that needs to be done in terms of convincing different departments and making sure that, from Home Affairs to Transport to everyone else understand their role in tourism. One of the most difficult parts in tourism is that we are reliant on things that we cannot control. Even the Ministry of Tourism cannot control, but we want it to be controlled in a certain way elsewhere. Point in case, the e-visa system. We've been talking about it for the past 2.5 years, but it's done by the Department of Home Affairs, and we can control that. So it is important that, the work of government, the holistic look from provincial to national to local government, we all work together to make sure that everything else works on the ground for tourists to be able to move around. We always talk about this in terms of, if you go to Mpumalanga as an example, the potholes on the road. People cannot reach the destination that they need to reach to.
It's very good for sales of 4x4s and other vehicles. But yeah, there's so many constraints, but we have to find ways around those constraints. Yeah. Agriculture is not going to be the panacea that brings jobs, unfortunately, one day. I don't think it is. I think we're barking up the wrong tree if we believe that to be the case. But what it does do is brings export revenues in. Just give me a broad overview of those opportunities as they exist right now.
But Bruce, I want to link up to the point that Chipua is making before coming on to that, because I think it's important. The story of the government working all holistically together. Because if you think about agriculture, for example, we do have a similar problem. On the infrastructure space, if you think about the dams, those roads to the farms, and all of those, they are all dependent in various ministries. I think that as a country, we do need to figure out to say, okay, when it comes to tourism, when it comes to agriculture or whatever sector, what is our national focus? And then all of the energies pretty much drives up towards that. But on the point of the jobs on agriculture, I think, Bruce, where we will see a lot more greater vibrancy, it's around the value add, which is the agro-processing space. I think there will be able to see some bit of good activity. But I also think that the expansion of agricultural land, because right now, for example, the state has roughly over 4 million underutilized land, putting that into full production.
Is it decent land? I mean, is it arable land? Is it quality land? You would assume that South Africa, with its big agricultural focus for 150 years, the good stuff is being worked really, really well. Is government land actually arable and useful?
Some of it is arable and useful, and you will remember that some of this underutilized land is sitting in the eastern part of South Africa, your Eastern Cape, KZN, Limpopo. Those are areas with higher rainfall. And I think that if we could bring all into full production, and we also accelerate our agro-processing activities, and in our planting we focus more on horticulture, we could get closer to that 1 million agricultural jobs that the NDP talked about.
I mean, just to add a case in point, and it's a small bugbear of mine, but we are the world's only producer of rooibos, which we export in vast quantities. I was in a spa the other day and picked up Rambutz, which I think is a German brand, and it was rooibos. But it was rooibos with cinnamon and ginseng and all kinds of things added to it. And I just went to myself, hold on a second. We send the stuff off to Germany. They take the stuff. They add a little bit of value to it and then send it home at 10 times the export price. And you go, we've missed a trick. I mean, that's the agri-processing opportunity.
That's the agro-processing opportunity. And I think it goes back to the...
It was Ronnefeld, not Rambutz. Rambutz makes coffee. Sorry, carry on.
It goes back to the DTI's point about localization, which, if done well, it could be useful, not enforced, but really selecting the subsectors where you feel that there is space to add value. And I think that's where we'll create jobs, but also add a bit of vibrancy to the rural economies.
Let's ask Mills about what he's teaching his students to create jobs. Because so often for years, we've been talking about decent jobs, and we've been talking about, these high-level work opportunities, fourth industrial revolution, and this is going to be the future. Fourth industrial revolution on my right over here. We'll come to you in a second. But South Africa needs any job, and lots of those jobs. Are you seeing opportunities to, like, not only these industries, but many other industries in terms of getting young people into that first job, as the Yes campaign has tried to do with Tashma Ismail-Saville, and she's really worked very hard, but it's taken her 4 years and she's created 54,000 job opportunities. Wonderful achievement, but not nearly enough to address the crisis, Milt.
Yeah, there are opportunities in the traditional industries which have been mentioned, in agriculture, in mining, in tourism. But with the changing structure of the economy and what COVID has done now with increasing digitalization, that creates new opportunities. Tremendous opportunities. The question, Bruce, is whether do we equip our students with the necessary skills to take advantage of those opportunities. So there is, on the one hand, a demand for certain skills and competencies. On the other hand, the supply. Does the supply meet the demand? Do we? And this is where the focus will have to be on. So when you talk about fourth industrial revolution, technologies and opportunities, are we doing enough to create the kind of graduates, that can take advantage, can capitalize on those opportunities? And that is where, for me, the challenge will be.
So many people I talk to who are in the startup phase of businesses are creating these digital businesses because they don't require massive workforces. They don't create a huge amount of admin. So much of the admin of creating jobs is dissuades people from creating sort of the jobs that you might get out of a Bidvest or out of a Servest or whatever the case is. And those are real hard labor jobs. But so often in an economy, you need to be creating layers of work opportunity. You get into your first job. Once you're in your first job, you get a network, you make some friends, you get your second job, your third job, and you bring other people up behind you. And surely we need scale. I mean, the 2 million job promise, I've written it down in my diary for 2030. I'm going to come back to you by then. Chifiwa is talking about real work, not sitting mucking about on a laptop.
We need scale because we have high levels of unemployment. And when you look at the profile of the unemployed, you mentioned them young, but largely working class.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about that, we think of industry, right? In order to access to industrial job opportunities. But are we doing enough to, our manufacturing sector has declined over the years. Are we doing enough to, to create opportunities in the manufacturing industry? Now, I just want to echo this point, to use as an example the importance of public-private partnerships. This is very key to economic recovery, post-COVID economic recovery. And we've seen in the pharmaceutical industry, Bruce, how in the United States and Europe, public-private partnerships have worked in the last 2 years, where there's been a great deal of public investment plowed into vaccine development. U.S. government, the German government, and we have a very good example also here in South Africa with BioVac. I think we need to focus on how we can develop that. BioVac started in 2003 with Pfizer, and the intention was to develop local capacity in drug manufacturing. How do we build on that? How do we build on the relationship that BioVac, for instance, has now with Aspen Pharmacare?
And one of the upsides of COVID, I mean, one of the things we've also learned from COVID, I mean, leadership and technology, all of these things, you cannot rely on global supply chains. This whole rush to the cheapest possible source of production, this whole thing of internationalizing your components and your ingredients and all of this sort of stuff. And once that global supply chain broke down, as it did during COVID, access to certain drugs, motor spares, even microchips, for example, have been disrupted by this global supply chain, which, when it works, is brilliant, but when it breaks, it destroys everything.
A very important lesson. One of the key lessons, we need to reconfigure the global supply chain. There's been too much dependence on a few regions, economic regions. Particularly China. So we've had a situation where the global supply chain in certain industry was centered on China. And when this crisis occurred and there was a breakdown, and that had a huge impact across the world. And we've seen now how the United States and Europe and other countries are positioning themselves to reconfigure the supply chain. I think we can also do that. And in the area of pharmaceutical, the sector, there's no reason why we should be relying on China and other European countries for supply. We can develop our own local manufacturing capabilities. And we can learn from India, we can learn from China. They were where we are today, but they've been able to, over the years, over the decades, to build the local manufacturing capability. And I think that this is a very important opportunity in terms of the manufacturing industry.
I once asked Chris Becker why he wasn't investing more in South African technology opportunities. And he said, because you can't find enough scientists and mathematicians of sufficiently high quality. And this was 10 years ago. And while they were expanding in China and India and in these countries, which have put such a strong focus on proper education and engineering qualifications. And we're still so weak in terms of the young people we throw into an education system that doesn't serve them.
China is a leader in the proliferation of engineering graduates. They produce millions of graduates in engineering, and so is India in technology. And I think this is where that is why possibly that's why it's in China. It's because of that. And I think that is something we are very weak at. And I think the other thing is. Which reminds me, it's a huge indictment, Bruce, that the African continent, huge continent, 1.2 billion people, many universities, many companies, has not been able to produce a vaccine. It's an indictment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we need to really do something about developing our research, scientific and research base.
And encouraging those skills to remain here to do that work, because so many of our young skilled people have lost hope in the future of the continent and have taken those skills elsewhere, Musk and others. I mean, it's a reality. So I saw a stat there. People often ask me, say, who are the next CEOs of the next huge corporates? Who's creating the next First Rand, the next Discovery, the next SAB, the next Bidvest, the next Servest, the next... Who are those people? And I can't put my finger on who those people are going to be. Because I wonder if the nature of business has changed to a point where we're going to see in the future in South Africa, like we see in the UK, I saw a stat this week, that 85% of the UK's companies employ fewer than 10 people. And that excited me so much, because that says to me that we're going to need 10,000 companies employing 10 people, or 100,000 companies employing 10 people, or more employing 10 people. Exactly. Your generation of guys starting out and starting up, purpose-driven business leaders, people who've been educated in many cases internationally as you have been, and coming home to say, right, opportunity, there's lots that's broken. I mean, if you want a chance to fix something, this is a good place to do it, because we've succeeded in breaking so much. Do you see that future, or do you see a corporate future?
And I must say, my vote for who would be the next CEO would be you, Bruce. If you would take it, the next CEO of the...
It sounds like work.
It is work, but and I'm actually going to have to rely on some of your words on the upside of down, which is
what is that upside of down?
A fantastic book by Bruce Whitfield.
Oh, all right, then carry on. See, your check's in the mail. You're never going to get it, but
what I like that you highlighted was that the majority of people that are employing people are not these massive organizations, and so the value of startups and the value of these small businesses important. I find a lot of encouragement when I hear you say, eight tourists creates one job, which means that you can have many different types of jobs, many different types of businesses that employ, these, let's say, 5 to 10 different people. From the power of the internet, we've been able to onboard over 50, 70 drivers in Namibia alone, just sitting at a laptop, So
okay, I was rude about laptops. I'm sorry. That is useful.
but the reality of it is that in order for us to get to a place where we can encourage more job employment, there needs to be an increase in the people that are creating those jobs. And right now, the ability to start entrepreneurship is only reserved for the privileged, which is not entirely fair. So what I find a lot of hope in is when I see people training digital skills, things like coding, things like programming. These are things that you don't necessarily need to have a college degree for. You see 18-year-olds that can go through these coding programs that can come up on the other side with a job that can get them 25,000 Rand.
So you're talking, and I've just had an absolute brain freeze at this moment. There's a coding program at the waterfront in Cape Town where precisely this is, you don't need to have a matric. You need to be at least 16 years old. Exactly. You get an aptitude test. 16 to 34, I think, are the parameters. You get an aptitude test, and these guys are going in, doing a 2-year course, and it's brutal. They have to show up. If they don't show up, they get kicked out. The rules are very, very clear. And they work blooming hard, and at the end of that, they're being snapped up in jobs, in the banking sector in particular.
That's the reality of today's market. The concept of internet money for us is something that's very exciting, because that operates above the head of a lot of regulatory stipulations that are keeping young South Africans from being able to access capital that allows them to start business and whatnot. Because the process of this internet startup is one of luck, capital, and support, right? So when we do look at programs like that, which is funded by AWS, actually, Amazon Web Services, and to tie it back into energy, is that we can have contingencies of the companies that participate in this country to make sure that they funnel capital into initiatives that can then support young South Africans to be able to create businesses.
You see that big number over there? It's a clock, and we get shot if we go over time. Mills, in 30 seconds, just give me a sense of the future you see, especially in the light of what's happened. We can even say light now, in the light of what's happened in the last 24 hours, as a fundamental shift in policy thinking and making, and a change. It feels very, very positive.
We've witnessed Bruce, seismic change. And it's change that has unsettled us, but which also provides tremendous opportunities. And I want to go back to what I said earlier. We need leadership. We need bold leadership that can make big decisions, that can help us define what the new normal constitutes. That will make us do things differently. It could be investing or quadrupling healthcare budgets. It could be investing in digital technology. It could be decarbonizing the economy. But we need a bold leadership. The opportunities are there. There's been a tremendous disruption, and we need to recognize that in many ways, we're not going to be able to return to where we were. Some things won't change.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is where, visionary leadership for me is required.
Thank you, Mills. Thank you. Trio?
Well, I think that, there is a bright future. As far as tourism is concerned, we will return to some level of normalcy, and we will do better than what we were doing in the past. I think we have the product here in South Africa. There is pent-up demand even now. People want to travel to come to South Africa, but we need to be more coordinated here at home. We need to sort out policy issues and legacy issues, including e-visas. We need to regionally be able to connect properly on the SADC region to sort out the SADC issues, because people travel here and they want to go to Zimbabwe, Namibia, and elsewhere. And East Africa is doing very, very well when it comes to that. And we need to market ourselves internationally properly. We need to clean up the image, and we need to send the right messages, and we need to be coordinated from embassies to Invest SA to Brand SA to SA Tourism to the private sector to make sure that we get what we want.
And to the guys to fill the potholes as well. Can we?
Absolutely.
Please. I just look at the last 24 hours and I wonder if there's not a huge opportunity to transform the ownership structures, perhaps, of state institutions, development bank, I don't know, all of this sort of stuff, just to ignite a little bit of enthusiasm and energy and positivity and capital into solving the problems.
Yeah, I think on the agricultural side, one of the big things that will be challenging is around agricultural finance. We're already seeing the challenges that are with the land bank. The key thing now is to say, can we copy maybe what has just happened on SAA within the land bank? But also for some of the entrepreneurs that are sitting outside there to really come up with the solutions that are focused on financing agriculture. I think that's another big area aside of these big political economic questions that are usually confronting this sector.
Thank you very much. And Zwelaki, last word to you.
With regards to the energy sector, we are happy to see that there's a lot of encouragement and support and incentives for these individual power producers, and that opens up the market for individual power producers, but also for international power producers. But being able to tether foreign direct investment in the energy sector into things that go into supporting startups and supporting young business creations and things of that nature, I think is the way forward for us in that regard.
Blockchain. We'll talk more about the blockchain. I'll explain it to you in a moment. Thank you so much for joining us. There are lots more sessions coming up. We're going to have a short comfort break in a moment. And then we're going to be looking at skills and unemployment in South Africa, turning it around. Anne Bernstein's involved. Jonathan Janssen's involved. Lots of really bright people are involved, and lots still to come. So please don't move too far away from the device that you're watching us on today. Thank you so much for joining us. And Dile, I think you're in charge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitfield, and of course, and all your panelists. I must tell you that I was very chuffed to hear so much talk around entrepreneurship and the role of new players in all of the industries that you guys covered. Well done. We're going to take another 5-minute break now, so don't log off once again. Feel free to grab another cup of tea. Maybe it's also a good time to visit the smallest room in the house. But prepare yourself for the second panel discussion that's coming up straight after this. As Bruce has already said, we're going to be talking skills and unemployment crisis in South Africa. How can technology turn our fortunes around? This will be chaired by the conversation strategist herself. She moderates globally. And of course, all of our conversations are about measurable outcomes. And I'm pretty sure this one will be no different. I'm talking, of course, about Nozipho Shabalala. See you in 5 minutes.
You're still with us at the directors event as we sit in on South Africa's biggest board meeting. I am Nozipho Shabalala, and we are now going into a panel discussion that shines the spotlight on the skills and unemployment crisis in South Africa. And we're asking the question, can tech turn their fortunes around? Now, joining me in this panel discussion, we're going to be joined by Mr. Tsakani. He is, of course, the Chief Director of Math Science and Technology at the Department of Education. We also have Riaz Muller standing by. He is the CEO of Hyperion Dev, and they've been doing some fantastic work around transitioning universities onto online courses and online education. Vikala Rankin is with me in studio today. He is the founder of Value Ed and Innovate, and he is putting business and leadership insights into the hands of his clients. Professor Jonathan Jansen is online and joins us in this conversation. Of course, we know he is a distinguished professor of Education at Stellenbosch University. Anne Bernstein joins us in this conversation as well. Also joining us online, she is the CEO of the Center for Development and Enterprise, that is the CDE. Hope Lukoto is right here next to me. She is, of course, Chief Human Resources Officer at BCX. We're standing by to have a compelling and insightful conversation about how tech can help us turn our fortunes around. Professor Jansen, I'm going to come to you next, but before I start off, I think just setting the context for this conversation is quite important. If we all consider, for example, the global pandemic that we find ourselves in, I think nobody can deny that it's certainly accelerated digital transformation, not only in South Africa, not only on the continent, but certainly in the world. We're seeing online education as the new normal. We're seeing remote working models as the new normal. Of course, we're seeing brick and mortar businesses moving onto online retail or e-commerce platforms. But this is not the only side of the story that we need to consider. If we take a look and pause and consider some of the stats SA data that just came out, we do realize that there is the risk of a growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So on the one hand, we know that if you look at South Africans, and especially the population between the ages of 15 and 24, a third of that population is neither in education or in training or in employment of any form. We also know that more than 20 million South Africans under the age of 35 are unemployed. So we certainly have a skills crisis. We certainly have an unemployment crisis. The big question for this discussion, of course, is can tech help us turn this around? Can we build a workforce that is primed for the fourth industrial revolution if we are able to close the skills gap? And so, Professor Jansen, I'm going to come to you because we have to ask the question of readiness first. Is South Africa ready to take full advantage of this transition towards a tech-driven future?
Thank you very much, Nosipo. And yes, I think South Africa is ready, but the question is ready for whom? And so you're quite right, of course, with those very disturbing, statistics to point out that, you have on the one hand a fairly sophisticated economy, a fairly well-developed technology, ready country, and at the same time, only a small percentage of young people can access those facilities versus the rest. Where you saw it most clearly in my business is in schools and universities since March 2020. So when the lockdown hit, there were about 20% of our schools, could transition fairly seamlessly from face-to-face to fully online learning. The rest didn't. And so our research shows that there are enormous learning losses that have accumulated, as a result to the majority population. Why does this matter? Because education is not simply about matriculation, as you know. Education is also about giving you the mindset, first of all, that bloody mindedness with which you are able to access and use technology, but also the basic skill set, that you need in order to do everything from an Excel spreadsheet to engaging on a sophisticated learning platform. And so for me, the big question that we must stare in the face, the elephant in the technology room, is this: how do we create an accessible, access to the majority population, whether it's schools, universities, or those in need, as you call them, those outside of education, training, and employment? How do you provide that in such a way that it is affordable, that it is accessible, and in such a way that we can transform the base of our economy through full participation or near full participation of all young people in the opportunities that technology offers? And unless we deal with that elephant in the room, it will still be a case of the rich getting richer, if you know what I mean, in technology terms.
I do want to maybe take this elephant and take one bite of it. And Anne, I want to maybe bring that bite to you, because what Professor Jansen is saying is putting on the table our education system in its totality. So basic education, higher education. And I want to maybe just take a systemic perspective from your side and say, what needs to be true in order for us to really see that accessibility that Professor Jansen is talking about, have that access for the majority to make use of, so that we really are building a workforce that is not made up of just the 20% that are coming out of institutions that were able to transition during this pandemic?
Well, thanks, Nozipho. I obviously agree with a lot of what Professor Jansen has said. For my money, I would like South African kids in our schools, our learners, to actually learn to read and write and do arithmetic. And the society is failing terribly at doing that. So before we talk about getting ready for the fourth industrial revolution, which we have to do, we need to fix our basic education system. And I don't believe tech is the way to think about that. We have to think fundamentally about system reform and how we make this a much better performing system for the vast majority of the schools. So before COVID, we were in terrible trouble. We were making very, very modest progress, but not nearly sufficient. So South Africa has to really grasp the nettle of basic education reform at a systemic level and stop sort of looking for shortcuts or sort of ideas about computers or tablets or whatever. We've got to think much more systematically about the integrity of the bureaucracy, its effectiveness, the role of trade unions, who runs the education system and for whom, and how we get to be a much, much better performing system overall.
So, Maluleke, I want to come to you with that, because what we're almost hearing and saying is that let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's go back to the basics. But I would imagine that some of your thoughts is that we've got to do both. And I'd love for you to talk to us about what are the major curriculum changes that are trying to respond to not only the pandemic, but the opportunity that this accelerated digital transformation really represents. But I'd also like you to respond to what we've heard from Anne, from what we've heard from Professor Jansen as well. Where should the baseline be and our starting point? Is it just about focusing on reading and writing, or is it about unlocking the genius of the both and right now?
Thank you very much, Nozipho, and let me also greet my fellow panelists. And yes, I've noted the comments made by Prof. Ananeli. Our thinking as basic education, starting with responding to the comments that they were made, is that it is not either or. For one to understand the education system, you need to understand that historically, there were three basic skills that every citizen needed to acquire for them to be able to function effectively in society. And those skills were mentioned by my fellow panelists, the three skills: reading, writing, and the ability to handle numbers, what we call arithmetic. Because all of us, we require that skill to survive in life and function effectively in society. Recently, there's a fourth skill that was educated and was agreed upon by educationists, that it was required and needed by every citizen. And that is what we call the life skill. And we introduced that and taught the life skills through a new subject that we introduced that we call life orientation. We are at the point where citizens require a new set of skills, what are called digital skills. And anybody who does not possess this type of skills will not be able to function effectively in society. And unless you are able to operate machines, your computers, your cell phones, you are able to stand in front of the ATM and be able to speak to the ATM, be able to generate reports on your machine and submit them, you will not be able to function effectively in society. There are those who are arguing, who amongst us is still submitting handwritten reports where they are working? And it brings in this debate around, do you still need to write, as in using your hand, or you need to operate a machine to be able to generate your reports. From educational point of view, we say writing is very, very important because it develops other motor skills, and it has been proven that it assists the child to develop holistically. And for us, it is not either or to say you must achieve this first and then you then move to that. We are saying we need to do this concurrently. Learners must learn how to read, write, and be able to manipulate numbers. And they must also embrace the changes that are happening in terms of technology.
Mr. Maluleke, let me just do maybe a follow-up question there, because I want to bring back the thread of the disparities that are really coming to the surface between the haves and the have-nots. I think the number that Professor Jansen said, he said only about 20% of our schools were able to transition successfully during the pandemic. And we do know that digital infrastructure, especially last-mile connection, is not a reality for every single school in South Africa. So the question to you is, if we get the basics right, the reading, the writing, the life skills as you're speaking about, what about the additional that we need to be looking at, which is those technological skills? Are those going to be the preserve of the few in the direction that we're moving, or are there really deliberate efforts to make sure that we're not leaving any learners behind as we transition?
The reserve for the few, it's not a new phenomenon. It is something even before technology came in, that the society was divided and that the government of the day is working on addressing those issues, especially the backlogs in terms of infrastructure. Where we come from, it was designed already to create this divide. And I think you would understand that the government of the day has prioritized resourcing of education, that education is receiving the biggest allocation in terms of the budget. This is a demonstration by government that we are committed to addressing these disparities. Yes, I do agree that the pandemic, which has propelled us into this new way of schooling, of education, of delivering education, has also exposed some of these shortcomings. But we are reviewing our funding mechanisms to ensure that we provide these technologies to our children, to our learners. We are working with our sister Department of Communication and Digital Technologies, as well as with mobile network operators, to explore various technologies that can be used to ensure that connectivity reaches to the far-flung areas. For instance, the fiber, which is a challenge that fiber, we need to dig the trenches for it to get to the far-flung areas. That we are exploring other technologies like satellite, for instance, which prove and reach far-flung areas. We do agree that there are those disparities, but we are committed as government to ensure that we will avail these technologies to our teachers and to our learners. There is no silver bullet. We are not promising that it will be done by tomorrow, but there is serious commitment from government to ensure that we close these gaps. And we do agree with my fellow panelists that there are these gaps.
Thank you very much, Maluleke. I'm going to move on to Riaz, but I just want to lift from what you've said. One of the things that you're laying on the table is potentially we need a triage approach, that there are certain things that are going to need immediate attention, but there are certain interventions that are going to take a much longer term to fix. And of course, we have to ask the question, what can we do now? And what does have the benefit of being put on the longer term plan? I'll come back to that because I know that Anne has some thoughts on that. But Riaz, you are at the coalface in terms of some of the work that you guys have been doing in terms of supporting universities to transition from traditional instruction to online instruction. And that really gives one the real sense of the state of readiness and how many South Africans are really in a position to get the kind of skills that we're talking about. Maybe, Riaz, just maybe if you could share very briefly that experience, what you found in that work, and whether, you know, the tertiary education system is ready to plug the gap of the skills that we say we need in order to turn this tech revolution into an opportunity in the country.
Thank you so much, and great to meet the fellow panelists too. I think that the world we're living in now is similar to after the financial crisis. The financial crisis made people lose trust in banks, and that actually brought about the fintech revolution. You can now bank completely on an app. You don't need to go to a branch. You know, in the UK and in Europe, there are fully digital banks that have 5, 10, 15 million customers. And even in South Africa, we have things like Time Bank. And when you look at the university ecosystem, those institutions have brands that are as strong as banks. And people trust universities. But when it comes to a traumatic event like COVID, where everybody has to transition to online so quickly, and this is not the core competency of the university, we are there to help universities extend their brand and service their students in a way that is accessible. You know, Hyperion Dev, the company that I run, we are one of the largest providers of tech education in South Africa. It was mentioned in the previous panel that, you know, this is an amazing vertical of education to accelerate people into employment as software developers and web developers by having to not go through, you know, a traditional 4-year route. And that speaks to the accessibility of employment and jobs in that space. But what we're trying to do is help university brands not just launch online courses, but also understand how to deliver courses that are perhaps not full degrees, but are still accessible. And that, in the post-COVID world, is a really exciting opportunity for South Africa and for our university partners.
Riaz, a quick follow-up for you there. I mean, what you are proposing does require a mindset shift on the one level, because we know that as South Africans, sort of traditional university instruction has been elevated as potentially more valuable, whether we are looking at the TVET system, and what you're saying now is that online is the new normal, maybe shorter degree programs than what we're used to. Are you finding that as a citizenry that we are adopting this mindset and we are more open to the idea that even tertiary education in how it's packaged and delivered is never going to be the same again if we want to make sure that we've got the right skills in the time that we need them?
It's about an evolution, and it's about how people perceive products. I used to work as a product manager at Google, and what I worked on was trying to get people to use Google Voice Search, which is hard, you know, to get people to think about searching with their voice and speaking to their phone is a huge mind shift change, but it's also a complicated product. And if you think of the product of a university degree and think about digitizing that, it's an extremely hard challenge, because it's not just an app which you may use for a few hours a month. This is a 3-year long or a full-time, hundreds of hours of students' investment in time. And to create a product that is good and is an amazing experience comparable to some of the best apps out there is something that's really hard. And that's what people are going to need to see to really trust online education. And the funny thing is South Africa has that. We have edtech startups like Get Smarter and 2U, who provide fully online degrees for some of the most prestigious university brands around the world. We have the talented people in our country to team up with our tertiary institutions, whether public or private, to help them scale the highest quality online education products. And that's what we need to do in South Africa, and this is the time to do it.
So Riaz, thank you for that. And what you've been able to do through your contribution is really bring in some of the realities of what's really happening in the educational system. Vigela, one of the things that has come up repeatedly in the panel has been the mindset shift. In addition to that, what has also come up is this idea that the skills that we thought were sufficient for one to participate meaningfully in the labor market are potentially insufficient now. And so I'm keen to understand from you, what is the new skill set that we should be focusing on? But I'd love for you to comment on the mindset shift as well, because you're also in the business of giving people the tools to actually make that leap from this is my current mindset today and this is how I might potentially think differently to make most of the opportunities that are opening.
Thank you, Nozipho. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the panelists. No, absolutely. I think, you know, one of the things that we need to understand is that our young people have to transition in this technology age very differently than before. I just think about my time when I was transitioning very simply from, say, for example, a record to a CD. That could take 3 to 5 years. But the kind of technology that's moving now is that, for example, the voice technology that's being referred to, that is going to be accessible in all vehicles in the future. It means that for our young people, for them to start thinking about how they start seeing technology as a viable means in terms of for themselves, they need to be given the skills and the ability to start seeing what's possible.
And the only way you can start seeing what's possible is if you're able to showcase the possibilities of what technology can give. It's one thing to have the digital literacy. It's one thing to have the qualifications.
Right.
And it's another thing to be able to say, how do I take this skill and how do I take these qualifications, utilizing the environment that we have and be able to produce what we need. And so, therefore, when you're talking about skills, the ability to network, and I'm going to talk about slightly different skills, the ability to network is a skill that I think young people need to be, given. And this is a skill that I think when we're looking from an educational system needs to start very, very young. We're going into an age where we're working from home. We're going into an age where we're slightly isolated.
Right.
The ability to have certain levels of resilience.
Yeah.
The ability to connect. How do you utilize connections for collaboration? We grew up in a mindset where competitiveness was the language that was used. And now we need to start inculcating skills of collaboration. Decision making. How do you make How do you decide on decisions based on certain levels of scenario planning? So I think what's important is one other element that we try to inculcate quite heavily is this element of inspiration. We're going to have to inspire our young people to believe in what's possible. I work with young people who, yes, have gone through the necessary processes of education, but their sense of self, their sense of self-worth is not being heightened to the level of creating these levels of expectation. And therefore, we're in an environment where anxiety has now started kicking in, where young people are experiencing mental health and mental wellness-related elements. So these skills are going to be important to keep people going, but also to believe and also to see where the journey is. I do believe the digital revolution is an amazing place where the level playing field has been created for everybody to have the opportunity to go out there and be able to do what they're capable of. But access and is going to be a critical ingredient.
So Hope, I think we've been building up a narrative to get to you because ultimately it is about jobs. It has to be, all of this needs to lead to a pro-employment future. We've heard from Professor Jansen saying, look, we need to make sure that we are really looking at basic education and whether we're getting everything right. And has come in and says, in addition to this, we've got to put the elephant in the room and we've got to have courageous conversations about that. Riaz is saying, look, mindset shift. And what I'm hearing from Vigela, he says, well, yes, we get the skills, right? But there's also resilience. There's also collaboration. There's all of these things. And the question I want to bring to you is that given the fact that we are sitting with a ticking time bomb now, as you look into the future, are you staring into a future that says we're headed towards net job losses overall, or we are potentially, because of the tech revolution, going to be able to create more jobs that could actually bring in these young people that not only have access, but they have the skills and they have the mindset, to Vigela's point, to make the most of those opportunities. Your crystal ball, what is it saying to us? Where are we going?
Thank you, Nozipho, and thank you to the contribution of the panelists. If I look at that crystal ball, I think really the tech-driven world can create more jobs. We really can rekindle economic transformation if we focus on emergent technologies and skills. The reality is technology is changing at a very rapid pace, including emergent skills like blockchain, artificial intelligence, automation. It's not a question of whether we are ready or not. We have to accelerate. Digital transformation is moving at a very fast rate. McKinsey did a study in 2017 that puts it very nicely, where they're projecting that by 2030, as many as 14% of the global workforce will have to change jobs or acquire new skills because of the result of emerging skills. So if you look at South Africa and you look at the high unemployment rate, you look at the effects of the global pandemic, and you look at the projected economic growth, you can see that we do have a challenge. Therefore, we can't afford to not focus on all of it.
Yeah.
On the skills that Vikela is talking about, on foundational education skills, we really have to collaborate to get it all so that we can really revitalize the current employee base that we have by equipping them with new skills from these emerging technologies. And the other thing that we got to dispel is the fear that skills will be displaced by automation. Automation will not really displace skills. We're going to look at it differently, that it's going to provide us an opportunity to look at new required skills, at new skills and capabilities that we got to build and enhance the skills and capabilities that we already have. And some of the skills that we should be talking about that we are not highlighting fully is things like design thinking and innovation as a skill and a capability. We got to recognize those things. We do have to create developers and equip them to innovatively solve problems. If we give them platforms from government, from corporate sector, and opportunities, hubs for the youth to go and engage with this technology, we really can unlock a lot of value. We can unlock a lot of entrepreneurial ventures that can participate in the economy and ensure that there's growth. So we have to do both. It can be done, but we have to focus on developing skills and capabilities that are going to drive digital transformation, and we have to accelerate digital transformation as well. We must get very comfortable with technology and become fluent in technology and work hand in hand with machines and promote that we adopt robotics and automation, because it also allows us to think differently about our careers. Like you were saying, the skills that he's talking about, collaboration, etc. Those are skills that automation is not going to take away from us. Yeah. So we must really zoom into problem solving, curiosity, critical thinking will always have a place to play there. And those are the skills that will allow us to create, to build, to innovate, to focus on things where we can really solve problems that affect us on a daily basis, where technology can be that solution that elevates our lifestyle.
So I do want to bring a little bit of complexity in, because on the one hand, we have a challenge of a high supply of graduates coming into the market, whether they're coming from traditional tertiary institutions or TVET colleges or whatever the case may be, coming into the market, potentially with the right skills, looking for opportunities in a range of companies. But you also have an existing workforce that needs to be upskilled, that needs to be reskilled, that needs to open up themselves to lifelong learning. How are you balancing that as business to say, how do we create employment opportunities so that we can absorb some of the labor market entrance, but at the same time realizing that there is internal interventions that need to be considered to upskill and reskill existing talent that might not be fit for purpose right now as the digital transformation takes place?
I think one of the things that we really have to do is to think differently about careers, about jobs. As an individual, one of the things that we are doing at the different stages of our lives is we are learning. We are learning informally, we are learning formally by attending qualifications and certifications. And even as you do your day-to-day job, you are learning. But technology is being so disruptive that even as you're learning, it's continually disrupting jobs and capabilities and the skills that we need. If we zoom in and focus on skills and we move away from looking at job roles, job families, those requirements that are really very narrow and they focus you on a particular stream and you can only follow that stream, we'll open ourselves much wider to where we can upskill and reskill the current workforce. You know, using stepping stone foundational skills. If we look at adjacent skills that people have, what can we build on from the skills that you have so that we add on more that are relevant to where we are headed and where technology is going? That will also open up room for the younger generation to play around with technology, to look at different work streams that they might not have thought of. If I look at the discipline of data science, that can be applied throughout the value chain in the corporate sector. But chances are we think about it in terms of technology only. Technology is going to have to be, those competencies are going to have to be reinvented throughout, not only in technology, in human resources, in marketing, in finance. So digital is really permeating everything that we do. And therefore, if we just revisit it and look and reimagine our definition and our allocation of what we say is a skill and a requirement, and we focus on the outputs and the requirements of a particular project and a job, we'll find that there's a lot in the pool that we can work with to build on to create the criteria that we're looking for.
I want to build on the word that you've used, and I'm coming to you with this because Hope is talking about reimagining. Everything from reimagining careers, reimagining what we consider a job. But Anne, you introduced the elephant and you put the elephant in the room. And I said, in response to that, potentially we need to come in with a triage mindset. There are things that need immediate emergency attention. There are things that we can focus on in the longer term. One of the things in the longer term, of course, is building a workforce that is ready for the fourth industrial revolution. The question to you, Anne, right now is, what can we do today, given the fact that the world is not standing still, digital transformation is moving ahead? What can we do today that really allows us to reimagine all the things we've spoken about in this conversation, but allows us to begin to close this gap quite deliberately?
Look, first and foremost, South Africa has to grow its economy. We have to grow the top end of the economy, which is what I think Hope is talking about, and I support that. But we're incredibly inefficient, unequal society. And if you look at today, we've got to introduce fundamental reforms to grow the economy. And one of those is that we can't skill South Africans unless we bring in foreign skills. Now, everybody wants everyone to be sort of upskilled as quickly as possible. So I am arguing that we have to fix our basic education system. We have to fix our tertiary TVET system, vocational education, which is incredibly expensive and very inefficient and not related to the world of work. But we also have to bring in as many foreign skills as we possibly can. South Africa desperately needs maths teachers. We need people to work in our universities as professors and lecturers to train South Africans. We need medical specialists. We need all sorts of people. So we have to do a number of very big things in South Africa to enable us to really deal with the reality, not the ideal, but the reality of millions and millions of young people who have no chance in our society, who get a terrible education and who can't absorb all of this or participate in this great new world. So we've got to open up labor-intensive manufacturing, and we have to think much more deeply about the overall comprehensive skills challenge that South Africa faces at all levels.
Maluleke, I'd love for you to respond to that, because what I'm lifting from Anne is she's saying, look, we really need to rethink the role that foreign skills could be playing in South Africa and helping us accelerate while we're still focusing on getting the basics right. We need maths teachers is one of the examples that she used. I'd love your reaction to that. Are we being a tad too nationalistic when it comes to bringing in the required skills that might allow us to accelerate towards the fourth industrial revolution? What are your thoughts on that?
I partly agree with Anne that we need to be realistic, and where we do not have skills here at home, we must be willing to import those skills. But it must be for a defined period of time while we are busy building and growing our own timber. As basic education, as an education system, and education systems across the world have a responsibility to supply the job market with people with requisite skills. And we have begun as basic education the process of policy review that makes room for introduction of new and relevant subjects that are going to teach our children digital skills and all the 21st century skills that my fellow panelists have spoken to: collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking, digital literacy, and all those 21st century skills. Coding and robotics is a way of us responding to the demands of the job market. We acknowledge that the jobs that our children are going to occupy in future are changing, and we are driving our agenda as basic education through a theme that we call building skills for the changing world. So I do agree with Anne that where we do not have the necessary skills, we must be bold enough to import them. But it must be for a defined period of time while we are building our own timber. And we must track how we are doing in terms of production of such skills. And coding and robotics, as part of our policy review, is one way of responding to the demands for the changing world.
Professor Jansen, I want to put on your table the question of priorities. On the one hand, Anne is calling for us to really think about importing skills. We're hearing an endorsement of that idea from Seleki saying, but in addition to that, we've also got to look at policy reviews. We've got to make sure that we get the basics right. I'm keen to understand if you could put the top 3 priorities that you think if we got these 3 things right, we are going to make definitive strides towards a workforce that is primed for the 4th Industrial Revolution. We're going to be able to definitively close the skills gap, and we're going to make a dent on the unemployment figures. What are those top 3 things that we should be galvanizing around as a country?
Thanks, Josepa. Look, let me be honest with you. I work in schools every single day, and when you go with me to schools and you talk about 4IR, people will laugh at you because that's not where the most of our schools are, And I have a huge respect for my colleague, Mr. Klabane, but, a government that cannot fix 2,000 pit latrine toilets in the Eastern Cape is not going to give you the platform to develop 4IR. Let's just be honest with each other. So we've got to look at other ways of getting there soon for the sake of our children. The only way out of this, apart from a systemic change at the moment, is public-private partnerships. Yesterday, I talked with one of the partnerships that I'm involved in the rural KZN. And what we've been able to do there, working with the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Education and Toyota, is we have been able to build the basic infrastructure in some of the most rural primary schools in that province. And I wish you could have heard the testimonies of the principals yesterday. They said their lives have been changed because now what you have, here's priority number 1, a basic infrastructural platform from which you can then move to what Hope very usefully talks about, which is the next level skills, which is problem solving, as she put it, critical thinking, innovating, and the ability to change. You're not going to get there unless you first provide, as I said, that basic platform. So that is for me, and we should get, I agree. By the way, we're already importing foreign skills. If you go to places like Toyando and you look at Mbilwi School, you go to Soweto, you know what you will find is that the best math and science teachers are from Zimbabwe and India. That is good. I don't know why my colleague wants them here for a defined period of time. Let's keep them here because you're not going to rebuild South African schools, in a short period of time. Let's open our borders, bring in the best technologists, the best teachers, etc. And that is the way you build a strong economy and also a strong skills base for the 21st century.
Professor Jansen, so infrastructure, make sure that we're leveling the playing field in terms of making sure that we don't have dysfunctional sites of teaching and learning, but really giving every learner a chance at curiosity and innovation and collaboration and a range of other skills that you raised as well, Vikela. I do want to come to you, Vikela, because I think at the end of the day, if none of this leads to enhanced competitiveness, if none of this leads to enhanced productivity, we might really be missing the mark. Do you get the sense that we're connecting the dots and we're completing the equation about why we need to get all of these things right and what the so what, if you will, needs to be at the end of this conversation and the end of this journey that we're on?
Yeah, no, we tend to, and I think it was mentioned earlier by the panelists, get really sort of roped into the technology bit and not asking ourselves a question as to what is the end result of all this. I mean, just to sort of add a couple of things to the answer that I'm about to give, how do we fix this really quickly? We need to create access. We need to create access and we need to create access. And the access that you referred to earlier on, like creating hubs, is important. There's some occupations, there's some careers right now that are going to be disrupted. When we see what's happening in retail outlets, we know what's going to happen with young people who are working at your Pick and Pays and Checkers, et cetera, et cetera. Those businesses are going to be disrupted. I do think that productivity and competitiveness is possible through this kind of technology, because what we want to be able to see is young people, being able to scale whatever that they do. We want to see them being not just, I know a young teacher who's brilliant at what she does.
Right.
And I'm saying, don't teach 20 kids, teach 20,000 kids. So let's try and see how we can create scale. In the future of, what you know and who you know is gone, but it's now about who knows you.
Yeah.
So how do we allow young people the ability to personally brand so that they're able to position themselves and their skills and their capabilities so that they are now competitive and able to play in a market where everybody else is playing? It's no longer also about the big punch in terms of I was listening to a young man talk about, trying to get into the corporate world and looking for employment. Employment is important. But it's now about how do I have a skill and how do I have what I have and how do I transition that into a need? How do I take that need, solution it, and how do I commercialize that? It's no longer about sitting and waiting and hoping that somebody is going to come along and give you what you need. So yeah, that's. I
love that. It's not about the big punch. Maybe it's a 1-2 punch now. So
it's a 1-2 punch.
It's a 1-2 punch and a jab. Hope I've got just over a minute, and I do want to just get your voice in here because what we haven't touched on is the workforce that is now subjected to these new hybrid models of working, the remote working. And we would be making such a grave mistake if we don't acknowledge that this has not been a silver bullet. And in fact, it may be creating different types of inequalities in terms of inequalities within the workforce. How do we make technology in the professional space an equalizer rather than a further differentiator between those who will progress and those who will not?
And remote work has been put up as one of the 5 forces that will be an equalizer in the digital age. And it shares that space with artificial intelligence and mobile and cloud. So it's really big, it's up there. And that's because digital transformation is what's driving remote work. Remote work will provide access to a bigger talent pool, a much wider talent pool. We should be able to actually access more people with disabilities and more women and even more young people because the space allows for that. We can now focus on the quality of the talent, not the location of the talent. And as we get a more diverse workforce, we get more diverse ideas and we are able to innovate even much quicker. And those are the things that we got to focus on. It also allows us to reach our customers much quicker in every way. However, it's not an equalizer as yet in South Africa because of access to technology, data, and connectivity. So we got to work at digital transformation and accelerating the digital capabilities that we have to develop to drive the digital transformation.
Well, my screen is flashing and it's saying time is up, Nozipho. I do want to take the moment just to thank my panelists for really leaning into this conversation with their insights and their expertise. If there's one big takeaway that I do want to lift, it is about the genius of the both and. We've got to import skills whilst we're building the foundation. We've got to think about mindset shifts while we're also thinking about how we use technology as an equalizer. We do not have the luxury of focusing on just one lens of this problem of skills and unemployment. If we want technology to turn our fortunes around, we've got to unleash the genius of the both and. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nozipho, for that wonderful panel discussion. And thank you also to your panelists. And as Nozipho says, we've got to unleash the genius. We're now going to take another 5-minute break, after which we'll get into our final panel discussion of our board meeting. I will be handling that panel discussion, and the theme we'll be dealing with is how can we better manage our healthcare resources in South Africa? Clearly a topic and theme that everybody is concerned about while we live through this pandemic. So let's take 5 minutes. I'll see you in 5 minutes as we kick off our final panel of the biggest board meeting in South Africa today. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And yes, we are on to our final panel for the day at the Directors Event, South Africa's biggest board meeting. Now, let me tell you that the topic we're about to discuss is probably near and dear to every single person out there, whether you are a professional, whether you are young or old, black or white, male or female. We all care about a healthcare system because this pandemic has really stretched it. There's a lot of issues, of course, that may not be new to all of us. We were very aware of how the government has had to respond to this pandemic. But the big question is, what is it that we have learned from what has happened? And how is it that we can take this forward as, of course, we are now full onto the drive of trying to get as many South Africans vaccinated as possible. We still have a healthcare system that must take care of all the other health needs. And I can tell you that the panel I've got here are the biggest brains in the industry to help us understand what the real bottlenecks are, and more importantly, to reimagine the future. What are the actual opportunities for change? Where do the solutions actually lie? Let me introduce you to my panel. I do have Dr. Memela Makiwane. He is the chairperson for the Council for Medical Aid Schemes, for medical schemes rather. If you don't know what they actually do, they regulate pretty much all the medical schemes we've got in South Africa, and they make sure that you and I can interact with these schemes in a fair and transparent manner. We also have Dr. Angelique Kutsia, who is the chairperson of the South African Medical Association. What they do is they pretty much look after the professionals in the industry. They are a registered non-profit organization, and they act as a trade union who takes care of the real professionals that take care of you and I. And then we've got Simon Hlungwane, who is the president for the Democratic Nursing Organization of South Africa, and they look after what I've been led to believe are probably the single most important group of healthcare professionals, and these are the nurses that are out there at our hospitals, private or public, and even in homes, looking after us as people who obviously fall ill, and of course who are dealing with this pandemic. And lastly, I have Dr. Nicholas Crisp. He is the Deputy Director General at the National Health, or rather at the National Department of Health, and he's responsible for, yes, you guessed it, the National Health Insurance. Big topic to be discussed today insofar as solutions are concerned. All right, we're going to go straight into it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you again for making the time to be here live in studio. I'm going to start, maybe let me start on my far left there. You know, I was talking to Nicholas just before we got into the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you, if you want to talk to somebody who's really experienced about our healthcare system in South Africa, straddling even two like governments, okay, is this gentleman, because he's probably seen it all. And Nicholas, let me start with you about what's on your mind, or rather, what in your mind are the key issues facing the healthcare industry now, especially as, of course, we're dealing with this pandemic, the lessons we've learned in the past few years, and as we go, past few months, and as we go forward and figure out a way to roll out this vaccine and still have a healthcare system that can take care of everybody, including, of course, all the other ills that happen in society outside of COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Andile. So I think obviously there are many challenges, and our biggest challenge at the moment, immediate challenge, is to get on top of the COVID epidemic. We're not going to get rid of it in a hurry, so we're going to learn to live with it. But if we are able to control the way in which it spreads, and obviously I think everybody knows about wearing masks and social distancing and keeping sanitized, hands sanitized and so on, that's still the most important thing. We are busy with a vaccine rollout, which is very dependent on the availability of vaccines. So it's important that we get that running as fast as possible, as completely as possible. But what we mustn't lose sight of is that people still get ill from other things. And while we are now entering into the third phase of the epidemic, and we are seeing a lot of people being admitted to hospitals again, that means that there's less capacity in the health system. And that capacity I'm talking about, it's not just hospital beds, it's the staff. Our staff are very tired. They've been under attack and they've been extremely busy. They've seen all kinds of deaths and discomfort, and they've lost their colleagues and their friends during this time. I think we need to have a lot of understanding for what the health system is experiencing at the moment. But we have learned a lot. Perhaps the most important thing we need to learn is that we are one another's health keepers. If my health is your health, and it doesn't help that I'm healthy and you are not healthy. And we are seeing it with the international hoarding of vaccines, the failure to share the way in which the system's resources work, and the way that we are dependent on our ability to purchase healthcare rather than that we provide healthcare to people because they need the healthcare. And that's the basic tenet of universal health coverage and of our solution in national health insurance. We've learned a lot of small details. We've learned to work together with partners that have not really worked together in the past before, or who have struggled and been suspicious of one another. And that strengthens as we go. It's tense at times, which is understandable. We have different points of departure. But that has been a massive learning exercise. Sharing capacity, ideas, resources, people amongst private and public sector and between the provinces. We've also learned that if we don't have one comprehensive digital system where we can share the data, it's impossible to plan. You cannot control and manage an epidemic if you don't know whether the epidemic is moving, what the cases are doing, what the tests are doing, where we are registering and vaccinating people. And the systems that are needed to run that will be the systems that we need to really be able to run an integrated health service going forward. We also know that not only looking after our people, but looking after our medicines and our stock and having proper stock visibility and proper systems for purchasing, this has been brought to light very prominently with all the abuse and the fraud and corruption that has gone on. And there are lots of lessons, lest we ever try and do any of that again, of ways in which we should restructure our procurement and manage procurement going forward. So, I mean, there are many more, but I think just as some introductory comments, those are some of the immediate lessons.
Right. Well, let me move over to you, Mamela, from a medical schemes perspective. What to you, top of mind, are the biggest challenges and potentially some solutions?
All right. Many thanks, Andile. I thought Nicholas would not stop because he was basically covering everything. Andile, my biggest thing that I would like to zoom in is the management of the limited resources that we have in the healthcare system. That's all we need to do. We need to manage those resources better. I'm very glad that our political system is very ripe for that. Nicholas has just talked about the ripeness of the political environment in terms of the thinking about universal health coverage and the NHI and all that. That to me provides a ground for better management of the...
In resources, what would you put in
the
there?
resources.
What would be the primary ways?
Think about everything in resources. We must know that the healthcare is supposed to provide a merit good. It's not a commodity like we have always treated it in South Africa. Healthcare is a merit good which must be accessed per need. And I'm very happy that Nicholas has just laid the ground in that regard. Because what that means, Andile, is we have not sufficient resources. Nobody has sufficient resources. Even the first world countries do not have sufficient resources. But we just have to manage what we have better, do what needs to be done with our resources. We have heard many a time when health resources are mismanaged, used for if I may say, kickbacks in tender systems, for instance, overpaying for services that can be accessed at more affordable prices and all that. Resources basically talk about human resources, financial resources, stock, drugs, healthcare technology. Talk about any resource that you can think of in the healthcare system that can be utilized. We just need to manage those better. And should I need to talk to detail, I'm happy to do that. Right. For instance, one of the ways we can manage our resources better, also in line with the thinking with Nicholas, is to stop this fragmented approach to healthcare that we have.
What do you mean?
We have a fragmented healthcare system. Even at national department level, we have 9 provinces managing smaller budgets when we can put all those together. At medical aid systems. For instance, we have various administrators all managing small pools of resources that, if put together, those resources would manage to do far much more than we are able to do now. A small scheme that has got perhaps 10,000 beneficiaries, for instance, is unable to withstand a pandemic like COVID if this were to go on for a considerable amount of time. But putting the resources of all the different schemes together, we may have heard that medical schemes have got reserves of up to about 66 billion or something like that. But that 66 billion is not is not available to all the beneficiaries of the medical schemes. Scheme X has got a percentage of that. Yes. Scheme Y has got another percentage. Yes. So imagine putting all those together, and move even further than that. Move out of medical schemes. Pool your medical schemes benefits, government or the 9 provinces benefits together. That's what we're talking about. Okay. And I think I'll pause there for introductory remarks.
Let's leave it there for now, Mamela. We'll come back to those limited resources. Angelique, let me come to you. South African Medical Association. What's your perspective? Where are the bottlenecks and what are the opportunities to even get better?
Oh, there's so many opportunities, Andile. We just need to identify them. We need to have the guts to change them. And we should, we always say it doesn't help us looking the other way. This is not going to solve our problems. Yeah. So for us currently, HR, human resources, is one of the biggest problems, and infrastructure. So human resources is not only unique to the public sector hospitals. We know there's a shortage of nurses. We know there's a shortage of doctors. We know that. And we know there's a moratorium placed on new appointments. So if we don't go and fix that, it's going to bite us, especially now with this third wave that we are seeing. Because as we have heard by Nicholas and Council of Medical Schemes, that the problem currently is not beds. Everyone is always asking us, do you have enough beds? Yes, we have enough beds. I'm quite sure about that. The question is, do we have enough doctors with experience? Do we have enough nursing staff with the correct experience to attend to those patients lying on those beds that are there?
But if we don't have enough, Angelique, then why the moratorium?
Don't ask me. We need to ask Treasury. We need to ask National Department of Health. We need to ask. There's a lot of people that we need to ask. But I also want to raise another concern that we from the Medical Association has been encountered, especially this last 2-3 weeks, is that doctors being employed by hospital groups. And we think that is wrong. Doctors should not be employed by hospital groups. A doctor needs to work independently and should not be part of a Life or a Medforum or a Medicare or whatever.
This is now the private sector.
That's in the private sector. So we only think about problems that's in the public sector. Don't forget, the private sector is there as well. Yeah. Don't forget that the nurses in the private sector is also not always correctly trained for ICU and high care. And by taking any nurse, just because she's a nurse, maybe she's a nurse working in theatre, and you take that nurse and put her into a high care ward or ICU, you put her up for failure, and you make it much worse. So the healthcare system on HR is a huge problem. We need to fix that. We need to work together. We need to break these silos between public and private sector.
Right.
We need to start to trust each other. There's a lot of distrust between the public sector and private and vice versa. We still have, in this day of age, that we refer patients to public sector hospitals and the doctor say, what does your GP knows? And actually cross with the patient for going for private healthcare, not understanding that that patient used some of his precious money to come and see us. Absolutely. We refer the patient back and the doctor just not seeing it. And vice versa. We don't always in the private sector trust what is happening in the public sector.
Yes.
We need to find each other halfway. If we're not going to do that, we're going to be in problems.
You also mentioned infrastructure. Did you just want to weigh
Yeah.
in on that? What is your concern there?
Infrastructure, huge problem. We have seen now what's happened at some of the hospitals in Gauteng, where there's a water crisis. We are from the opinion that if a hospital has got autonomy about its income and how they spend their monies regarding fixing a lift, fixing water problems, fixing a toilet, and not having to go through another department and wait for that for ages for that department. It should be the CEO of a hospital should have the powers and the accountability to do this and make sure his hospital is properly fixed. It's painted, there's toilet paper, the toilets are
So
working.
you're saying the red tape is holding that back?
I think there's a lot of red tape holding it back.
Okay.
And then again, the hospitals, the public sector hospitals, needs to compete with each other regarding quality of outcomes. So if we know that hospital X or clinic X has got excellent outcomes and the patients are happy, patients will vote with their feet. So they will rather then go to that hospital or that clinic than the other public sector clinic because it's give poor quality.
I see. Simon, you're representing the nurses. They've come up in almost everybody's comments. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think at the utmost, it's the human resource that we have as a challenge. And I want to believe that it's more on the planning that we have in the country that is so poor. Currently, I think last year the World Health Organization released a report where they made an analysis and said, recommended in fact, to say all the developing countries need to be increasing the intake of doctors and nurses by 8 to 10%. But in South Africa, what happens is the reverse of that, is that I can give an example. The colleges in Gauteng, training for nurses, used to take around 300 per year. But starting from last year and even this year, their intake has reduced from 300 to 50. It tells you that they've reduced it, they're taking around less than 25% of what they used to take in the past. But when you look in the contrary, currently, when immunization or vaccination is happening currently in all areas where there are centers of vaccination, nurses that are doing the vaccination are being removed from their other core clinical areas, clinics and the hospitals. And what it has caused is that there is a lag in terms of the other services. Your immunization of children gets delayed, taking care of cancers and many other chronic illnesses. So what's going to happen is that the services that were supposed to be rendered is now neglected. And as a result, we might end up having far bigger problems in terms of chronic illnesses, people dying from heart attacks and so on because they are not taking their medication or being taken care of. So, but when I say the planning, I mean our thinking must then begin to say, what is it that we want as a country? We then develop short-term plans and long-term plans. Currently, as a country, we do not have plans to say how many trauma nurses do we want, how many ICU nurses do we want, how many, in terms of the population, nurse population ratios. We don't know how many nurses we want to train in the next 5 years. And it becomes a problem of planning. And it then supersedes every other thing that we do, because you just get told, I can give an example currently, a nurse will be trained for 4 years, whether you're doing a diploma or a degree, after which you go for a 1 year community service. So it means the government or whoever is investing is a 5 years investment. When they've done the community service, then they have to continue to work. In government, they get told they don't have money to employ them, which means you were investing in training this particular individual, but at the end of the training, you say you don't have money to employ. You didn't plan that this person will subsequently, after completion, service the community that he was working in. But when you're done doing that, then you ask yourself, who is servicing the communities that that nurse was taking care of in the year before? You find that in the clinics, the extra hand that was there is then taken away. So it simply goes back to say, our planning is poorly and myopic. It doesn't look into the short-term and the longer-term planning. Because there's another study that was done it was published 2 weeks back in the Lancet Medical Journal. It indicates that employing more nurses and more doctors, in fact, the developing countries and any other country, it was done in Australia, but we have a similar context. We can save a lot of money by avoiding litigations. There's many other adverse events that you can avoid if you have adequate staffing. And I must tell you that right now, nurses, because they work long shifts, you work from 7 in the morning, so it's a 12-hour straight shift. They have a burnout because some of them are told you can't take leave because there's COVID. You must take care of the patients that are there. And obviously, for good reasons, nurses are called upon to stay in service. But when they are burned out, there isn't even emotional support. There isn't even adequate psychosocial support. You get burned out. Sometimes you get stressed by just seeing your colleague dying, your colleague getting COVID. And tomorrow you think, I'm going to be next. And you worry when you say goodbye to your children in the morning, you don't know whether you're going to come back. So there are those fundamental issues. Yeah. It's only because in the planning of the human resource, you don't begin to say, how do you provide support services to the very same nurses that you have? And there's a lot of nurses who can realize that now that I don't have a cleaner in this particular environment, I have no choice but to take a mop and clean. But while I'm doing that, I'm neglecting to take another patient into the resource bay or so on. So there's a fundamental problem when it comes to human resources.
And all of you from different walks of life are agreeing around this human resource issue. Let's just stay with it and now focus on solutions. Okay. Nicholas, it's obvious what needs to be done. What do we do?
So my view is that we need a revolution. This is not, you can't fiddle with the edges. Our health system is messed up and it's happened evolutionally rather than being properly planned. And there are many structural problems. And I mean, I'm on record of saying this. This crazy public-private split that we have where half of the total spending on healthcare is sitting in the private sector who looks after 15% of the population is not sustainable. And in order to feed the beast, you have to overservice, you have to do things that may not be the best for a patient, you have to do things in a certain way that consumes resources, especially human resources. So that's on the one side. Then on the other side, you have 85% of the population who has to be looked after with the remaining 50% of what we spend. This is the whole reason why we need the revolution. We need the massive reform where we use all those resources. 8.5% of our GDP is spent on healthcare. That's us as citizens. Forget about the government, forget about who's buying what or whatever. We spend 8.5% of our GDP. That's pretty good. For a middle-income country, that's good. And we are a very big economy, so in rand terms, that is a very big expenditure on healthcare. Yeah. We mustn't compare with those who have got 14, 15, 16, 17% of the biggest economies in the world being spent on GDP. We've got to focus on what we've got. The problem is when you're spending 4.5% of your GDP on 85% of your population. That's the challenge. And then the resources that are sitting inappropriately used, where we have specialists doing GPs' work. We've got GPs doing nurses' work. We've got nurses doing everybody else's work, the cleaners' work, as we've just heard from Simon. This is not appropriate. We need to have clear scope of practice, yes, but we do need to understand that that scope of practice of each of our professions is not so rigid that we can't help one another. Right. And we need to be able to, as Angelique said, use the 11,000 GPs that are in their practices who may not be fully utilized to be involved in the primary healthcare system. We need to be able to understand and care for those nurses who are currently running systems. Sometimes they run whole hospitals on their own. And I mean, that is just not right. It's not fair, and it's not fair on the patients.
Who leads the revolution, Nicholas?
So we are leading the revolution. That's exactly why the Department of Health, the government, and we are the ones who have tabled the bill to get a national health insurance so that we break these barriers. What the national health insurance will do is to create this pool that Mamela was talking about, bring all the resources together. It won't happen overnight. Nobody's naive enough to think you can just suddenly change everything. You'll break the system. But we do need to undo some of these structural problems. We need the fund. We need to capitalize that. People think it's new money. We're not talking about new money. We need to mobilize the money that is currently through the provincial equitable shares into the provinces, and we need to bring it into the pool so that the autonomy that we were hearing about just now, where the staff and the management of the hospitals have their own autonomy. It doesn't work like that now. Right now in the public service, the provincial administrations are the purchaser and the provider of care. The National Health Insurance model says somebody else will be the purchaser. You need to provide properly. But you're going to compete, as we heard just now, with private providers, other public providers, and so forth. And you need to up your game, you need to up your quality. But we will make it easier for you by pooling the resources, as Mamela said, and by pooling those resources, we can purchase at cheaper prices because we understand the volumes that are involved. We need the systems to be able to measure that. And we need generally to be able to do that long-term planning that Simon was talking about. The capability is there. In fact, the new organogram of the National Department of Health has created a whole separate branch just for human resources for health. Right. That's a major, major move in the right direction. Gotcha. But the health department will not do this all on their own. The whole HIV epidemic has been dumped on the health budget, and then the health budget gets cut. The whole epidemic of COVID is on the health budget, so you've got to scratch money out to the rest of the system. And we heard just now from Simon what it's doing to our nursing staff. Every department needs to help. Everybody. The social development department, the water department, everybody needs to be mobilized to make sure that a hospital has water, there's proper communication, resources, proper fiber to the hospitals and the clinics and so forth. And if we pull together like that, the public and the private sector delivery mechanism, we'll work together without any problem.
Let's stick with NHI. Coming to you, Mamela. I'm seeing in the media, though, like there's some friction seemingly between medical schemes and what the NHI bill is saying. I read somewhere something about the fact that the NHI's intention is that when it's fully implemented, that may negatively affect medical schemes. What is your view of the current NHI bill, and how is it working between collaboration between government's intentions and, let's call it, the interests of medical schemes?
Andile, you may hear about friction within the media and conflict. That is expected. Nicholas calls it a revolution. When a revolution is in place, not everybody will be in agreement. The reason why it's a revolution is that there's significant change that needs to be implemented. So there will be differences of opinions, thoughts, and all that. So Simon talked about the myopic views of different perspectives and all that. We need to move from the perspective of a provider, because once the provider changes, then I'm left wanting. Move from the perspective of a consumer, because now I pay for medical aid and I pay this amount of money, I must be entitled to superior service because my money is superior. Move from that perspective. We must adopt a societal perspective. Hence, we are all in agreement, because I'm saying that without fear of contradiction, because all the noises that we hear in the media, even the objections that you hear from different players and all that, none of those noises are actually vehemently opposed to the revolution or the move to universal health coverage via the NHI. None of them are opposed to it. Right. There is some disagreements in how to tweak this part or tweak that part, which are fine. Yeah. I mean, countries that have got a universal health coverage approach, for instance, take the United Kingdom. They established their NHI, or rather their universal health coverage, in 1948, soon after World War II ended, and their system had collapsed, perhaps even worse than what we are complaining about here in South Africa. Their health system had collapsed, but they implemented it in 1948, soon after the end of the World War, and it worked, and it still works now. Is it the same as it was when it was implemented in 1948? No, it has changed. So we also have a similar. We need to have a similar approach and know that we need to start. We'll implement. It will be tweaked from here and there, and it will morph with time until we make it work. We don't have to be perfect. So what is our stance as the Council for Medical Schemes with regards to the NHI? The Council for Medical Schemes is fully in support of the implementation of the reforms. As you know, the small steps that we are taking as the Council for Medical Schemes include, for instance, we are already starting to consolidate the pool that we have control of within the medical aids scheme environment. For instance, there is amalgamations of smaller schemes, schemes that have got members of less than 6,000 or so are being encouraged to amalgamate, and that process is going on. Not very long ago, we had in excess of 140 schemes. Now we have 76 schemes under our regulation.
And how does this consolidation help?
The consolidation helps by amalgamating that pool we are talking about. The same as what Nicholas... Correct. It's the economists will be talking about efficiencies, economies of scale and stuff like that. So that is a no-brainer, because if the medical schemes environment could manage to reduce the number of schemes perhaps in a couple of years to a handful, the problems that we have now, the issues that we have, people complaining about their benefits being expended by July, for instance, those may be a thing of the past. But of course, we don't want to end there. We want to migrate all these beneficiaries into the bigger pool of funds, which is the revolution Nicholas is talking about. So we are doing that, amalgamations. Schemes that are government-related are encouraged to amalgamate. We are trying to reduce the number of options in medical scheme. You may think about any medical scheme. You probably have a medical aid Andile, and you will know that at the beginning of the year they send you a confusing document that says choose an option, and you have
like 15 options.
You have no idea how this option differs from that one and what's the benefit of. All you know is I'll pay so much here, and this one has got so much dental. What does that mean? You have no idea, and no one can explain it to you. Not even myself, being a chairperson of the Council for Medical Scheme, can explain it to you. You see, so we need to move away from that, pool our resources together, and try to manage the resources meant for healthcare just for that.
Okay. Angelique?
Just for that, yeah.
Are you joining the revolution? And if you did, what is most important to you?
I'm definitely joining the revolution. I can't toy, but I will join it. So for me and for Sama, if we can scrap everything and start over tomorrow, I think that would be the answer.
What do you mean by everything?
Just flatten everything and start all over again and build it correctly from the base. So we are still trying to fix it. And you know what? If you've got an old house and the foundation is not very good, you can try to paint that walls and you can try to fix the leaks as much as you want. It's still going to have a problem. So, but we know we can't do that.
Right.
So what we would suggest, fire everyone that is not a medical or that sits in a position that has no idea what they are doing in that position.
Fire them.
Just fire. Let's get rid of them.
Right.
We can't fire them, actually, because they will take us to CCMA. So what we can do is, let's put them all in another political party. Let them go in there and let them stay there. And let us get people employed in positions who actually understand healthcare and who has come up through the ranks. It is no use to think that I'm a professor and I've run my department extremely well, therefore I can now become another role player in the management, just use Gauteng because I'm from Gauteng province, and now I can go to the Premier's office.
Yep.
You put me up for failure because I know my work, but I don't know the other part of it. So let's get people through ranks who knows and understand. Healthcare is a very, very particular, it's got a particular environment. You cannot ask someone who has been a teacher for many years, run his school, all of a sudden come into healthcare, wants to run a hospital or a clinic just because he was a good teacher. Or maybe because I know him very well.
Yep.
And he's my best friend, and I want him here.
Yep.
So we need to get rid of that. Then we need to look at all the policies, scrap the policies that's useless. Let's be honest and start over again, make it correct, Stop getting people from overseas in trying to tell us what to do. We are all sitting here. We have enough experience. We know the people. We've got unique communities in South Africa. I know my community. Simon knows his community. Mamela knows his community. Nicholas knows. We all know. Why do we need other people coming in, paying them a lot of money to tell us what to do? And in the end, we in any case need to do it over again. So let's just be open and frank and start over and get it right and work together. I need to be able to pick up the phone and phone Simon or Mamela or Nicholas and say, listen, there's a problem.
Right.
And he must not say, you know what, yesterday you slammed me in the media and now you want my help.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give it to you.
Okay, so that collaboration is important too.
We should have collaboration and we should listen. We understand what is happening in healthcare.
All right, Simon, you clearly have to lead the revolution because you are in the forefront of the human resources question. But what are the solutions, brother?
Well, like it was said here, the first question we need to ask ourselves is to say, given the pandemic of coronavirus, the COVID-19, how do you leverage this pandemic in designing a system that will be resilient in future? So we start with collaboration between private sector, public sector, all stakeholders, the medical aid schemes, the unions, and everybody. We make sure that we work together to make sure that in future, what we have is a system that is resilient to everything that might come in. Mind you, this may not be the last pandemic we experience in our lifetime. Absolutely. So we need to say, let's ensure that we realize universal health coverage. By flattening the curve, you ensure that all these partners must play a role together. And we begin to stop staying in our own cocoon corners and say, I want to watch how that person makes a mistake. But we need to collaborate further and make sure that we have a system that is fit for purpose, a system that is giving access to everybody. You need to stop having people in Venda, in some rural areas, who get diagnosed with cancer, or some die waiting for an appointment in Mpulukwane to go for certain diagnostic procedures. So we need to say, how do we increase that access for everybody? But it cannot happen if we are fighting on the vision, because it means we will not cooperate. We cooperate, we will not collaborate, we will not partner together. So the partnership becomes very important. We just need to lead a vision together and work together. That's where it will all start. But we also don't need people who are not fit for purpose in the positions, because they won't drive anything. Believe you me, if you put a person, whether it's in an administrative or a political position in health, who is not health trained or doesn't have a health background, they can spend 5 years trying to understand the concepts only, and they will deliver nothing. And that's the problem that we have in most provinces in our country. So we need fit for purpose leadership between the executive and administration. Once you get that flattened and understood clearly, then they can drive a vision, because they know what they're doing.
Fit for purpose leadership. We've got 3 minutes left. There's a hot topic on the agenda right now, and I want to hear all of your thoughts on it. Vaccination. Nicholas, go first. How far are we? How are we doing? Are you happy?
Yeah, you
are we doing all the right things?
You should have asked me last. Yes,
did you get vaccinated already?
Yes, I got vaccinated the day before yesterday, and I would encourage everybody. And I waited my turn. I waited for my SMS. I followed what was supposed to be done with the EVDS system, and I'm satisfied I got vaccinated. Thank you very much. And I would encourage everybody else to do that. The queue is currently over 2 million long, and we don't have enough vaccines to move it faster than we are moving it at the moment. But in terms of what we expect from a health professional, administrative, and organizational perspective, with the resources at our disposal, we are satisfied it's moving as fast as we can do it. If we get more vaccines, we can double the capacity. We've still got a huge resource amongst the GPs. The nurses are fantastic, the way that they smile and the reports that we get. 99% of people are extremely happy with the care that they've been getting. So I think we need to congratulate our colleagues on the ground. We need to thank them and we need to support them. And be patient and wait, and you will be called for your vaccination.
Mamela, I've got a medical aid scheme, you know. I thought I could get sorted quicker than most. Seems I have to join the queue and wait.
You know, Andile, what COVID has done for many things, including the acceleration of what you call technological advancement and all that, it has done the same for healthcare. You know, COVID has shown us that this dichotomy of public versus private is nonsense. It needs to end. Look at the seamless transfer of patients between private and public hospitals that has come out of COVID. Brilliant. Angelique talked about the difficulties that private practitioners may have referring patients to hospitals. That did not happen during COVID. We're talking about solidarity has been talked about, and everybody sings that song now. And we know that's as a result of COVID. Everybody has even punchlines like, you're not safe, or I'm not safe until we're all safe.
Yeah.
You know, that is exactly the view that we need to adopt. And the answer to that, only one. That's revolution we've been talking about, and we are all in agreement about it.
We started the revolution at the directors' event. This day shall remain etched in history. Angelique, your thoughts?
I fully agree with all the previous speakers here today. We need to vaccinate our members or our people in this country as soon as possible, over 60 years old. I have heard how many people asking me, should I vaccinate? Yes, you should vaccinate. There is no contraindication. You will not grow a beard if you are a female, and if you are a man, you will not fall pregnant. And please, I'm begging them to please go and get onto the EVDS system. Ask your grandchildren to add you to the system. Go and vaccinate. We need it. We don't have enough resources to look after people in hospitals. And you don't want them in hospitals. You want them with mild disease outside of hospitals. And I would also want to plea to the GPs out there, please do not give a letter to your patient with a prescription and never touch him if he's COVID positive. He must come to your surgery. You must examine that patient. You need to walk the talk with that patient. As doctors, we need to be vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. I'm very happy. Whether it's working or not, I don't care. I haven't got sick. And I'm not using ivermectin and none of those things. So please go and get vaccinated. And GPs, examine your patients. Walk with them. Hold their hand with COVID-19.
Absolutely. Simon?
Well, vaccination is for public good. So everyone must be vaccinated. Obviously, those who are willing, those who don't believe in it, let them stay away from it. However, we must say,
at their own risk.
But vaccination is for a public good. If we are to rebuild our economy, if we need economic recovery, we need a health nation. So it means we must vaccinate everybody. We must make sure that at least this pandemic does not continue to hamstring our economy. So we need a healthy people to build a healthy economic recovery. That's why I'm saying everyone must be vaccinated if they are willing to.
Absolutely,
Thank you very much.
And Angelique has told you, you're not going to grow a beard, you're not going to fall pregnant. All the stuff you're reading about is not true, okay? Go ahead and vaccinate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking my panel today. Mamela, Angelique, Simon, as well as Nicholas. They are all very well-experienced professionals in the field, sharing with us the challenges that are there in the industry. But today, on this very day, on the 11th of June, at the directors' event, we started the revolution of how do we get our healthcare system where it ought to be. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
That brings us to the end of the 2021 Directors event, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget now that you need to complete the feedback survey. And once it lands on your inbox, make sure you give it the attention. And of course, that 1,000 Rand Take-A-Lot voucher is still available. And we'll let you know via email if you are the lucky winner. Thanks also to all of our speakers, all of our moderators, our wonderful panel members for all of your insightful contributions. Thank you also to BCX for the support that you've given us as headline partner, and also to the Institute of Directors in South Africa for the ongoing relationship. Ladies and gents, we continue to live in the pandemic. You heard it from the panel themselves. So please do not let your guard down. Continue to wash your hands and sanitize regularly, wear a mask, and maintain social distancing. And when your turn comes for the vaccine, be there on time to make sure that you get vaccinated so that we can get this our country to be on the right trajectory for growth. From me, Andile Kumalo, your host for the 2021 Directors Event, goodbye, salani kahle, totsiens.